Local broadcast of Frontline is made possible by electronic accounting systems, providing computerized accounting and business services in upstate New York for more than 25 years, and by the members of WXXI, who invite you to join them in supporting public broadcasting.
Howitzers could shoot chemical and biological shells farther and more accurately than any field artillery in the U.S. arsenal.
What are those guns? Is that an accurate statement? Isn't that a superior capability he has?
It's a question the U.S. prefers not to answer.
We have heard about those reports, but we can't confirm them.
Tonight, the story of those weapons and the man who made them.
He certainly was, as far as artillery equipment was concerned, an absolute technical genius.
How did the U.S. support this man? And what were his secret dealings with Saddam Hussein? And who killed the brilliant arms designer last March? Tonight on Frontline, the man who made the supergun.
With funding provided by the financial support of viewers like you, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is Frontline.
They'd been following him for months. They'd been monitoring his every move. Yet as he drove to his Brussels apartment on March 22, 1990, Dr. Gerald Vincent Bull had no idea that tonight he was the target of a hit squad.
It was definitely a complicated operation by a state intelligence organization and carried out by some 80 people. It was outstretched for almost 2 years.
For the last time, Gerald Bull rode the elevator to his apartment. In his lifetime, his guns and shells had been sold around the world. The weapons he'd designed were known for their deadly accuracy. Now, the knowledge he carried in his head had become too dangerous. His killers were waiting for him on the landing of the 6th floor. As he fumbled for his front door key, he was shot 5 times with a silenced automatic.
The execution of Gerry Bull was definitely not a lone assassination, but a state execution of an enemy of the state.
He was buried in Montreal. He'd always inspired intense loyalty, and the church was full. Charles Murphy was his lifelong collaborator.
Gerry Bull was a person who had a deep impact on a number of people around him. I could see the impact from his funeral, where there were 600 people there who came from all over the world, from all periods of his life, from the time he was a graduate student, the time he was in prison, the time he worked in Europe.
He had such an international standard in the artillery world, of course, that, well, you couldn't go any place without dripping over Gerry Bull's name somehow.
Bull's death only added to his legend and to the mystery surrounding his latest and biggest project.
Within a week or 2 weeks after the execution of Bull, you have an avalanche. You have companies under investigation. You have the British Customs and MI5 moving very quickly. You have material appearing in the UK. You have the same thing all over Europe.
British Customs had seized 8 crates. Inside them were 8 huge steel tubes. The manufacturers claimed they were part of a petrochemical plant ordered by the government of Iraq. But British Customs had been tipped off that they were part of a weapons system, one that had been forged and milled to the exacting specifications of the late Dr. Bull. Put them together, and you have the world's biggest gun barrel, over 3 feet wide and over 100 yards. But artillery experts questioned how a gun made of sections could contain the explosive pressures needed to fire a projectile 1,000 miles or more. But in Britain's Imperial War Museum, there is a record of such a gun, and there's one man who's actually seen it.
As soon as I saw the supergun, it reminded me of this thing.
Major Robert Turp is a self-described gun runner, but in World War II he was a member of MI-10, a British Army intelligence unit. Its task was to assess captured German war material. In 1945, in a bombed-out munitions factory, he discovered the secret plans for a Nazi terror weapon, the V3. The V stood for vengeance. Made from sections, the V3 was 150 meters long. Turp also found parts of a prototype.
And it was in bits. It looked like a heap of plumbing. It was a set of tubes, 30 millimeter caliber, each about 2 meters long, that screwed into each other. We took 2 or 3 of these lengths out and bound them together, and it fired, and the gun didn't blow up. I'm convinced that Bull's design was based on that original design.
Turp wrote a technical appraisal of the V3. His report was added to the files of captured Nazi war secrets, filed and forgotten.
Somewhere in the War Office there must be a report. I wouldn't be surprised if one of these reports isn't somewhere in the Pentagon. But remember, it was in 1946, 47.
In 1946, Gerald Bull was only beginning his journey into the world of ballistics. At the age of 16, he had entered Toronto University as an undergraduate. Classmates remember him as high-spirited. He enrolled in the engineering faculty and studied aerodynamics.
Did you like Jerry Bull?
Oh, yes, of course I like him. Well,
instantly, sort of?
Well, I don't know whether instantly, but I basically liked him. He was obviously a bright young man who did well and made sense.
Bull did his postgraduate work at the Institute of Aeronautics, where at the age of 22 he became the youngest PhD in Canada. Here he once worked round the clock for 3 days building a wind tunnel able to generate speeds of 3,500 miles an hour. Bull wasn't the most brilliant student in his class. He was more of a hands-on engineer than a theoretical scientist, but he did command attention, and he had enormous tenacity.
Of course he was very stubborn, but I think stubborn people, provided they do things right, are very valuable, because that's how something happens, in fact. It doesn't happen through 10 committees that dilute things and end up with possibly nothing.
Previously classified film preserves an image of a brooding Dr. Bull. The Cold War had just begun, and defense work provided a fast track for smart engineers. It is typical of the man that he was willing to get his hands dirty, lifting the prototype of an air-to-air missile onto its primitive launching sled.
He's a brilliant engineer. He was a doer. He wanted to build things. He wanted to do things other people couldn't do. He wanted to promise to do things that people said couldn't be done.
The wraps are taken off secret Canadian defense research for the first time at Valcartier near Quebec City. Here at the Canadian Armament Research and Development Establishment, a team of experts have been working since 1945 to create weapons that will blunt a possible attack by intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Developing rocket systems for this early Star Wars system meant more work in wind tunnels. But testing models in hypersonic wind tunnels was time-consuming and expensive. Bull had a brilliant alternative. Why not shoot them down the barrel of a gun? Adapting existing technology was the nature of Bull's genius.
He did very smart things at Cardi in a very simple way. He developed an original and effective and incredibly cheap way of measuring aerodynamic properties. by observing the signature that a model left by being first shot from a gun, by using a very simple device, paper screens. By observing this signature, measuring them up, you could determine the progress of the motion of the model. Well, from this you can determine its aerodynamic characteristics.
On press day, Carty's Golden Boy posed by his cannon. This newsreel, not seen since the day it was shot, captures Bull at the beginning of his lifelong fascination and ultimate obsession with guns and artillery technology. But his chances to test the limits of gun technology came soon after, when he moved to Montreal to head McGill University's Project HARP.
The HARP program stands for High Altitude Research Project, and it was a proposal which came out of the studies that Jerry and I made as to what was the peak altitudes that various size guns could shoot to.
The man behind the project is McGill's 34-year-old professor of engineering science, Dr. Gerry Bull, an intense, impatient genius who's been working for 5 years on a cut-rate research program. Dr.
Bull wanted to blast Canada into the space race by pioneering the use of big guns. In 1963, a U.S. Navy landing craft beached in Barbados. The U.S. Army and the Canadian government were funding HARP. A 16-inch cannon with a barrel 60 feet long was to be Bull's mammoth test tube.
I'm reporting to you from Barbados, where this week McGill University entered the operational stage of its Project HARP, High Altitude Research Program. It's as unlikely a project that ever jointly involved a university, half a dozen Canadian companies, and the United States Army.
The U.S. Army presence was a sensitive issue at HARP, where Dr. Bull liked to stress the peaceful purpose of his projectiles.
These were tense minutes for Dr. Gerry Bull. Years of calculation, trials, and errors would soon be put to the test. Would the projectile behave as miniatures had in the laboratory? More than 60 cameras were on hand to record the shot. The cannon was elevated to 80 degrees, higher than any of this type had ever gone before. Cameramen were moved away from their sight.
As the countdown continued, Dr. Bull was the last to seek refuge in the HARP bunker. It was hard to avoid questions about the military's interest in the gun.
Well, now this gun was commissioned for peaceful research. How do you explain using the data for the military?
Well, I think that may be just a matter of semantics, really. It was commissioned for peaceful research, but all of the Army's research is necessarily headed toward the things the Army is interested in.
Well, that's rather a tough question. We felt that the Americans would be more interested in the technique because of their very diversified program and their known diversified approach to all problems. We thought they'd be more receptive to coming out with something that was perhaps not as conventional.
It was during HARP that Bull began searching the military archives for the secrets of Germany's master gun builders of World War I. They had produced a 420mm howitzer called Big Bertha. They'd also designed giant coastal batteries and a long-barreled gun with a range of 60 miles or more.
Jerry's concern was always what could he do bigger and better? What forefronts of engineering capabilities could he push? And during the HARP program, obviously, we'd used all the guns that were available then. In the process of doing that, we got particularly interested in what's called the Paris gun, developed and used in the spring of 1918.
Built by Krupp, the Paris gun shelled the French capital from a range of 75 miles. It was the first city-busting terror weapon, but the Germans destroyed it immediately after the armistice.
It was one of the mysteries in the post-World War I era, exactly what happened to all the ballistic data that was involved with the Paris gun. Gradually, it has emerged that Bull himself had quite a hand in unearthing a lot of it and remodeling most of it using computers.
Bull and his partner Charles Murphy actually wrote about the Paris gun. In their book, they calculated the gun's geometry and its internal ballistic behavior.
It seems to be sort of a major sort of a guiding light throughout his commercial and scientific life.
The most obvious lesson to be learned from the Paris gun was think big. To achieve additional range, the German engineers had made a sectioned gun barrel. Bull did likewise, joining two 16-inch Navy guns together. In 1966, Bull's launch team set the world altitude record for a gun-fired projectile. Bull was aiming to enter the space race with his big gun.
Obviously, one difficulty of shooting from a gun is that you have very high accelerations. What's higher than a rocket? A rocket might have acceleration of 30 or 40 Gs. In the case of the 16-inch gun, we had accelerations like 20,000 Gs. So with accelerations that size, you had to worry about designing your payload to withstand it.
Unless this problem could be solved, it would be impossible to shoot sensitive electronic packages into space. Simply increasing the amount of propellant would damage the payload and wear out the gun. But doubling the gun's length would halve the acceleration because the payload would have twice as far to travel to achieve the same speed. A longer gun also needs less propellant to achieve the same range.
And the natural thing to do is say, well, we got a 16-inch gun, what would a 32 do? Twice as big. So we went through engineering calculations at that time and reported on in unclassified reports about what would be the performance of such a size gun.
Bull's calculations included guns that were 3, 4, and 5 feet wide. Larger calibers would reduce the G-forces inside the barrel. This was essential if Bull was to achieve his dream of putting a gun-launched satellite into space. Photographs from the time show the strain on Bull. To keep HARP going, he had to please both the Canadian government and the U.S. military.
If you want to continue on your research, you have to get your funding from where you can, and if the military are going to put in the funding, that's where you get it from.
The weapons application is, if you like, the standard use of guns. I think he was interested much more in the non-standard, but of course, similar to von Braun, he had to work both sides of the technology to achieve his goals.
What you put in the projectile was not Bull's concern. And I suspect this HARP project ties up with the gun. A gun that, after all, it can put a projectile into orbit, can certainly put one up and down on the ground somewhere.
In fact, he was talking in terms of using 1 meter guns on paper studies in about the mid-1960s. He was talking about 5,500 kilometers ranges with no trouble at all.
The armies saw space as the next battlefield. So Bull proposed a special shell to shoot down incoming ballistic missiles. With the Army calling the shots, he also wrote a report that's still secret. It dealt with the homing devices, ballistics, and terminal guidance systems for a gun-launched orbiting nuclear bomb. For the Canadian government, HARP was becoming too militarized. It withdrew its funding.
I would say the Canadian government in the first years of 1950s lived up to everything I had expected. That is, we couldn't be as big as the Americans or get involved in that stuff, but we could be the best in what we're doing, and that was important. It was when the idea of having the best of something dropped into being mediocrity and just doing nothing, that's a disheartening thing.
In 1967, the big gun fired for the last time. The Pentagon had pulled out in favor of missiles. Bull lost his funding in the U.S. and Canada.
I suspect that perhaps he just made too many enemies, because certainly he was not prepared to put up with nonsense. And he cut the red tape in many places, I'm quite sure of that.
He's famous for a remark he made on one occasion referring to some of the people in headquarters as cocktail scientists. And this created a very difficult atmosphere on those who felt he was referring to them. And I'm sure they remembered that for some time.
Desperately disappointed, Dr. Bull returned to Quebec. Here, he acquired an 8,000-acre site that straddled the border between Canada and the U.S. He went into the arms business with a company called the Space Research Corporation. From the air, it was possible to make out a firing range, and on it, a big gun, just like the one on Barbados. There's no doubt where Bull's heart lay, but for the moment, his long-range dreams had to be put on hold. He had some contracts with the U.S. Defense Department, but he needed new customers, and what they wanted were smaller, conventional weapons. Once again, Bull showed his genius for making new technology from old. Bull's corporation produced a package for Third World armies to modify and upgrade old gun systems. And he began to rethink conventional artillery assumptions from barrel to breech. The result was his own extraordinary invention, the Gun Canada 45, the prototype for a new 155mm howitzer. Later versions bore Dr. Bull's signature, the longer barrel, which to this day can outshoot anything in the armories of NATO or the Warsaw Pact. Artillery specialists came, saw, and were impressed.
I met him once when I was in Canada in the late 1970s, when we were taken over there just to see the GC-45. That was demonstrated coming into action and firing a number of rounds. Basically, he developed a 45 caliber barrel and it enabled you to fire a 155 projectile to a range of 40 kilometers, almost double the range of existing artillery at that time, and to do it with accuracy, because that is what counts.
Bull's work on ballistics was considered so valuable that in 1973, by special act of Congress, he was made a U.S. citizen. He had developed a brand new shell. Bull's extended range, full-bore 155mm shell had base bleed at the bottom end. This released burning gases and reduced drag, giving it a range of 24 miles, 6 miles more than the standard NATO shell. Tests also showed it had twice the terminal lethality of its NATO counterpart. The shell should have been a winner, but perhaps because Bull was still the outsider and not part of the Pentagon old boy network, the U.S. Army didn't buy it. But Bull had gone into production. He desperately needed a large order. Then he found a customer, but with catastrophic results. His legal troubles began in 1977. This ship, the Tugela-land, was carrying a cargo of space research shells and gun assemblies. It was a voyage which violated a UN arms embargo and broke the laws of Canada and the United States, because the Tugela-land was bound for South Africa. South Africa's army needed Bull's shells for its war against the Marxists in Angola. Washington had tilted toward the South Africans in the war, and supplying Bull's shells to them would serve that policy. The CIA promised to help. For them, it would be a deniable operation.
The way it would be handled would be that South Africa would be told where these rounds were available, these 155 rounds, and that they could contact and make the arrangements themselves.
The case officer was a Major Clancy.
Clancy would definitely have been following orders. He would have been working with Africa Division Chief on this.
Major John Clancy III was the CIA paramilitary officer given the job of finding shells for the South Africans. Through a CIA arms dealer, he was put in touch with Bull's Space Research Corporation.
He told me himself that he was looking for some 155 rounds and that he had found some.
He had found them in Belgium. Here, Bull had opened an office to market his shells. The man who had helped him set it up was an American arms dealer called Jack Frost.
I told him that if they had no artillery capability, that the acquisition of space research technology was rather useful.
Shortly after that conversation, a party of South Africans flew to the United States to meet Dr. Bull, but they hadn't told Frost about their visit.
I heard of the visit to SRC by a friend of mine who described it this way: as a load of money to be made. The South Africans are in here doing all kind of business.
The visit to space research infuriated Frost, who feared he was about to be cut out of his 10% commission by Dr. Bull.
I immediately called SRC Dr. Bull, and he admitted he had a visit. And at that point, I said, well, you can't continue this because it's illegal, and you better stop immediately. His response was, well, Jack, we don't think we'll do anything because it looks as if it's too chancy.
To make doubly sure he wasn't being double-crossed, Frost informed the United States Office of Munitions Control that Bull and the South Africans were discussing breaking the arms embargo, but it made no difference. Within weeks, Bull ordered 60 cannon barrels and 50,000 semi-finished shells from a U.S. Army munitions plant. Apparently, someone in Washington was pulling strings and cutting red tape. Approval that could have taken months was granted in just 4 days.
4 days is impressive. They gave it a top priority. They concentrated on it and pushed it through. It wasn't put on a back burner. It wasn't committed out.
Altogether, Bull smuggled 50,000 shells worth $30 million. He had done so with the apparent knowledge of the U.S. government. But he was transferring more than shells. He was passing on technology that would in time enable the South Africans to make their own sophisticated artillery. But Bull's activities were now being investigated in 4 countries. He was also beginning to feel the heat from the media. Naively, perhaps, he agreed to be interviewed by a British reporter about some shells that were supposed to have been shipped to Spain.
Are you sure they're in Spain?
I know that well, some of our people said they've talked to them and seen them in Spain, and
according to what we've been told, they were re-exported out of Spain on a ship called the Breezan, and it gave its destination as Canada. Only guess what?
Where did it go?
South Africa.
South Africa. I haven't got it. We'll certainly check it.
Now back home in the U.S., Bull was also being investigated by Special Agent Larry Curtis of the U.S. Customs Service. He was surprised to find evidence leading to the U.S. government.
Well, during the course of the investigation, I went to the CIA in Washington. The door was shut on me. I was not allowed to make direct contact.
He also found the letter from the arms dealer Jack Frost to the Office of Munitions Control.
He had information which he had supplied to the Department of State prior to our investigation. Nothing, to my knowledge, was followed up on of his original information.
Is it safe to kiss older women?
But the evidence against Bull was mounting. Behind the smiles, his life was falling apart. His companies were going bankrupt. Even though one part of the U.S. government had seemed to encourage his dealings with South Africa, another was now bringing criminal charges against him.
We were talking about indicting 15 individuals, I believe 3 countries and 5 corporations.
But then, the weekend before the trial, Bull and his partner, Rogers Gregory, went into a huddle with the U.S. attorneys. A deal was being struck.
When I was advised the following Monday that Bull and Gregory were the only ones being indicted, I was totally surprised, very disappointed, and bewildered as to the results.
The next day, Bull pled guilty. The effect was that evidence of government cover-up and CIA collusion in Bull's South Africa deal was never heard in open court.
I was told that the reason we never went any further was because there had been a phone call from the White House. I took that to mean there had been a phone call from the White House to Main Justice stating, don't go any further with the investigation.
Whatever happened behind the scenes, Bull was left to fend for himself.
At the time he did plead, he did not think that he would go to jail. He thought it would be a fine. He was very upset by his jail term, and it colored his life emotionally. He felt rejected by Canada and by the U.S. during that period of his life.
To the end of his days, Bull was obsessed with what he saw as the injustice of his 4-month jail term.
I would say he was not a happy camper. He was very embittered against the United States government and the government of Canada. He made statements to different newspapers that he would never set foot in North America again.
After his release, Bull took a Caribbean vacation. He rested up, took stock, and gave vent to his feelings to Canadian television.
The only way Dr. Bull can get even is to sell his brains now to a foreign country. He says he's turned his back on Canada for good.
I feel more than betrayed. And I feel that all of the memories and all the traditions and everything that I thought the country stood for has been betrayed. They think they've degraded me. They haven't. They think they've broken my spirit. They haven't. What I did and what I built, to see it cheapened, to see people trying to degrade me personally, is common criminal. For what?
Bull moved to Brussels, to the international center of the arms business. Word of his arrival reached men like Sarkis Saganalian, the Miami-based arms dealer.
And I had a friend in Paris. He said that Jerry Bull is out of the jail. This is in 1981 now. And he's not living anymore in Canada or in the United States. He's living in Belgium, in Brussels. I said, when you see him, say hello.
Everybody in the arms business fetches up in Brussels. In the same way as they say all roads lead to Rome, all guns point from Brussels.
1981 was a good year to be in the arms business. Iran and Iraq were fighting a protracted war. In Iraq, they called it Saddam's War. Despite the bravado, Saddam's war was not going well. Saddam needed better artillery than his outdated 130mm Soviet guns. Remembering Bull's ability to upgrade old guns, Sarkis Saganalian spotted a business opportunity.
I brought this to Jerry's attention, and he said, yes, let's see what we can do. They tore the gun apart. The time went by, it's 6 months, 7 months. I never get anything from Jerry except paying him money. At that time, I find out that Jerry is flirting with Chinese to build the gun over in China and sell it to us.
So he's playing both sides.
He plays, you know, two ends against the middle. You know, you can never get anywhere with this guy. And which I said, Jerry, you go your way and I'll go my way.
Despite U.S. restrictions on the transfer of military know-how to China, Bull, still an American citizen, had been dealing with Beijing for years. But Washington was tilting toward China, and in Bull's case, the law was not being rigorously enforced.
Basically, the Chinese had a large number of old systems of Soviet design. They really wanted to have systems with a longer range. And that's where Dr. Bull came in with his 155, 45 caliber systems.
It was the South Africa story all over again. Bull signed a 3.5-year contract to engineer and train the Chinese to manufacture their own 155 howitzers. He did so without a license from the U.S. government to transfer technology. Bull's dealings with China came to light one evening in 1984 when one of his close associates, Dennis Lister, was stopped at the Canadian border by U.S. Customs.
Hi. Where do you live, please? Canadians all?
Late in the evening of March 23rd, I was notified that Lister was at the port of North Troy, Vermont, and that he was carrying a metal suitcase, and that the suitcase had been examined and it contained a great deal of documents.
Dennis Lister was carrying computer disks, blueprints, and a contract with China.
As I recall, there were 10 individual contracts, and in fact, the contracts were initialed with the initials GVB, which I recognize as the initials of Dr. Bull. The contracts had an estimated value of approximately $25 million.
Curtis had a strong case against Gerald Bull. But in 1984, relations between Washington and Beijing were close. Curtis was shut out once again.
There were some classified documents. They never were declassified. I never got any action on this, and I followed up on it 2 or 3 or 4 times, attempting to get these documents declassified so that I could present them to the U.S. attorney, grand jury, or whatever was needed.
But by now, Bull had another deal in the works, this time in the Austrian city of Linz. Adolf Hitler used to paint watercolors in Linz. He built a munitions factory here and named it for Hermann Goering. Today, it's a steelworks called Voest-Alpine, which in the early 80s was interested in Bull's guns.
Dr. Gerald Bull, he was a very outspoken man. He was an interesting character. He emptied a bottle of whiskey so fast you couldn't compete with him. On the other hand, he certainly was, as far as artillery equipment was concerned, an absolute technical genius.
Voest-Alpine bought a license to manufacture Bull's GC-45 cannon. It may have been the best gun in the world, but it was expensive to develop and build. They lost millions.
Jerry Bull apparently didn't treat them right when he was selling the technology. Jerry never gives you something complete, you know. If he gives you a cup, either the handle is missing or the edge is not straight round. That's what Jerry was.
But in the end, the Austrians smoothed out the bumps in the system. Iran and Iraq soon were customers. The United States had banned arms sales to both countries, which were then at war. But Washington favored Iraq and had reason to look the other way on transactions there. And Saddam Hussein was sold on the Austrians' towed howitzer.
The Austrian Minister of Interior had a discussion with Saddam Hussein, and well, Saddam said, to make it short, well, where are our guns, and can't you speed up delivery? We require them urgently.
By now, Saddam's war had bogged down into bloody trench warfare. This is where artillery is king of the battlefield. Saddam Hussein ordered 200 of the Austrian guns and used them to great effect. Bull's reputation with the Iraqis was so high that by the late 80s, his draftsmen were busy at their drawing boards, designing 2 brand new guns for Saddam Hussein.
They had towed artillery, which does have some battlefield limitations. So he developed 2 new self-propelled artillery systems, a 155 and a 210 millimeter. And both of those were shown for the first time in Baghdad last year. The 210 is the longest range self-propelled artillery system in the world. It goes out to 57,000 meters. So that is unique.
But it also bears a striking resemblance to a self-propelled gun called the G6. Based on Bull's designs and made in South Africa, it too has been sold to Iraq. The South Africans have also sold 200 of these to Iraq. It's the G5, a direct copy of Bull's own GC-45.
We have clear evidence that American technology has been illegally exported to South Africa. From there, it has been re-exported to terrorist nations, to Iran, to Iraq.
Congressman Howard Wolpe's House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee investigated Gerald Bull's dealings with South Africa and the U.S. government's involvement.
The bottom line here is that because we have been so lax in our enforcement of American laws, we are now finding American-made technology in the hands of the Iraqi forces that are pointing their cannon at American soldiers. I mean, that's outrageous.
Bull's guns can fire high explosive, chemical, biological, and possibly nuclear shells. They fire farther and are more accurate than Allied guns. Saddam Hussein has bought 200 from Austria and 200 from South Africa. Bull's howitzers are now in the front line of the Gulf War. But to Gerald Bull, this was simply a means to an end. Although the big gun was abandoned on his Canadian testing range, he had not forgotten about it. To revive the project was his pet ambition. All he lacked was the money. And when he drank, he talked of superguns.
The more whiskey he drank, the more he started talking about the idea of producing a supergun. You see, the more whiskey he and my colleagues drank, the farther the gun shooted. But in the end, it was about 1,000 kilometers. But they also said, technically speaking and theoretically speaking, you could even produce a gun which shoots 2,000 or 3,000 or whatever kilometers. But this was a time when I normally went to bed.
Gerald Bull had his own bedtime reading. He was going back to World War II, back to the V-3 terror weapon, and everything he could find out about it. In the process, he unearthed Major Terp's long-lost report.
Quite by accident, I found him staying in the same hotel that I always used when I went to Brussels. And naturally, we used to meet occasionally in the evenings, coming down the lift, and we'd sit and talk and scribble on bits of paper. And we would discuss various features of guns, long-range guns, because I knew by that time that Bull was only interested in long-range guns. He said, of course, you knew the German gun. Well, I did know the German gun. Not all that well, but I know it. I think I'm probably the only one that ever fired the thing.
Early in 1944, the Germans built the full-size version of Terp's gun at Pas-de-Calais, 95 miles from London. Thinking it was something else, the RAF fortuitously bombed it. When Allied troops finally overran the site, they found the gun in ruins. To be on the safe side, British troops blew it up again, but not before a war artist had produced this impression. It showed that the Germans had sectioned the gun barrel to control the internal pressure.
In an ordinary gun, what in fact you're doing, you're hitting the projectile with a hammer, a very heavy hammer, to send it out, rather like you hit a golf ball with one bang. Under this system, you would rather push it at a gathering momentum. Let's say your pressure will be kept up behind the shell for its full length of barrel travel.
Bull's fascination with superguns would finally bring him back to the United States. In 1985, the Defense Department wanted to hear his ideas about a big gun.
Gerald Bull was an essential ingredient to any program such as this. And in my opinion, if an activity like this were going on, wild horses would not keep Gerald Bull from being in the middle of it. This was his pride and joy.
Jerry Bull came to Washington armed with volumes of data about the application of his gun. Fred Quell, who was there, still has the visual aids with which Bull illustrated his talk.
What he did was to first summarize the whole history of gun development, including the Paris gun, the Big Berthas, the Doras, and so on that the Germans built. And then he went in detail through the HARP program.
During the HARP project, Bull had always stressed the peaceful nature of his research, but what he was now proposing was an intercontinental cannon. The applications he was illustrating were strictly military.
Jerry outlined how you get ranges that could go all the way out to 6,000 miles.
And then Bull unveiled his masterwork, the plans for a supergun that he'd been refining for 20 years, sectioned like the Paris gun and with the low internal pressure of the V3, a gun which he described as industrially feasible and costing a mere $10 million. But once again, his hopes were dashed. The Pentagon passed on the project.
Let's put it this way. If one's ideas and capabilities are not appreciated at one location, it is only natural to see if you can find another customer. And as near as we can ascertain, Jerry did find a ready and willing customer in Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
The best evidence suggests that Bull was in Baghdad in 1988, and that was the year Saddam Hussein gave the go-ahead for the supergun project. A cheap, simple strategic weapon, its attractions for Saddam Hussein were obvious to Israeli military men.
They don't have their superiority. They don't have the know-how in final guidance. And therefore, the last solution that they can have, it's the supergun. Take in the case of Iraq, you only need two guns, possibly one facing east, one facing west, and you can command most of the Middle East.
For Saddam Hussein, the supergun could do everything his missiles and Scuds could do, raining high explosives onto enemy cities. Unlike Scuds, the shells from a supergun could not be shot down by Patriot missiles, and they would need no complicated electronic guidance system.
We're not talking about pinpoint accuracy, we're talking about accuracy of hitting a city. In Tel Aviv, to take the prime target, everything is compressed into a relatively small area, and it's a relatively small target, and it could be neutralized relatively quickly.
It would be literally the famous bullet that fires in the air. In this case, it wouldn't be where it lands. I know not where. You would know exactly where it was going to land.
Building a supergun was a cloak and dagger operation. To conceal his true purpose, Bull subcontracted different sections of the supergun to different factories. Word got around that he was looking for people with the right skills.
He asked me to find two highly qualified workshop engineers. That's men that were used to producing heavy, large caliber barrels. I believe he was offering these men something like $30,000 or $40,000 a month.
The huge tubes that made up the barrel were engineered in England. The trunnions, or supports for the barrel, were found in Greece. Pipes, pumps, and valves from Switzerland made up the recoil system. 75 tons of steel parts forged in Italy formed parts of the breech. Altogether, companies in 8 countries were involved.
Now, Dr. Bull spoke to me about powder, and he was obviously very interested in the types of powder used. In a gun like this, you will want a comparatively slow-burning powder.
Bull's powder was made at a factory in North Belgium. The workers were paid extra money, and the work was done in great secrecy. But then the factory's parent company went broke and was taken over by a British company headed by Dr. John Pike. When Pike entered the headquarters of his new acquisition, he found a highly suspicious contract in the company's files.
It was the contract for the supply of 2 types of a particular gun propellant. The gun propellant was not in itself unusual. It was the sort of propellant that can be used for a number of different systems. However, what was unusual was the actual physical size of the pieces of propellant that were to be supplied.
Pike also came across a memo written to Dr. Bull by his associate Dennis Lister. In it, Lister detailed the test results for 2 kinds of propellant. The Belgian factory had been making propellant for two systems, one 350mm prototype and a huge 1000mm gun. That's a 39-inch diameter.
The story is that the System 350 propellant was intended to be used as the propellant for this experimental gun. Once the experimental gun was working, then the 1000mm system gun could be finally designed. Its propellant could be finally designed.
The tubes seized in England came in two sizes, 350mm and 1000mm. Reportedly, the 350 had been tested in 1989. Later that year, a firm order was placed for the 1000mm propellant. By the end of 1989, the plot to build the supergun had been penetrated, and now Dr. Bull himself had become a target of Israeli intelligence.
Carrying all his knowledge with him and not cooperating with too many people definitely was a key strategic point that if you take him out, you are losing control of the entire system.
In a sense, he had no governmental protectors. His government of his birth had rejected him, and the government whose passport he carried had imprisoned him. He was, in a sense, vulnerable from a standpoint of being a person who would not have a lot of people concerned if he was killed.
Bull apparently knew his life was in danger. He told friends about threats from Israeli intelligence, Mossad. An Israeli journalist who specializes in intelligence matters, David Halevi, investigated Bull's death for Frontline. His account is based on briefings from a senior officer in Israel's Ministry of Defense, a top Mossad official, and conversations with two field agents.
Another warning was offered to Bull. The guy saying, "Sir, if you carry on, we will have to take harsh action against you, against your companies, and against the people involved with you." Basically, he walked away from the meeting. I mean, he said, "I don't want to listen, I heard enough." With Bull, it was a lost case. His fate was sealed. Two teams of assassins arrived in Brussels.
One team waited at his apartment building, while another was outside the office as Bull was picked up to be driven home. Only days before, his prototype gun had been tested in Iraq. It seemed Bull's lifelong ambition to build a supergun was about to be fulfilled.
And the moment he leaves the office, they click on the closed-circuit network indicating that he left the office, that they are following him.
Bull was apparently oblivious to the danger he was in.
The moment he entered the apartment building, 2 clicks. And while he is going up to the 6th floor, the team that was in the apartment building, waiting in ambush, is rushing to the 6th floor through the emergency staircase, not using the elevator. Gerald Bull and the team appear together at the entrance to his apartment. One guy opens fire, 5 shots. You don't hear any noise. The only thing you will hear is a whoop, whoop kind of noise. And they're gone.
According to Halevi's sources, the hit team was driven to the train station in Brussels and took the first train out of town to Germany. It had taken 5 bullets to end the plot to build the supergun. But Bull's legacy remains in the Gulf. At least 500 of his advanced 155mm howitzers, the best ever built, stand ready to be used by Saddam Hussein against Allied troops. And the supergun. Will its design, like the great guns of World Wars I and II, be rediscovered to be built by another Gerald Bull?
Funding for Frontline is provided by the financial support of viewers like you and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. For videocassette information about this program, please write to this address.
This morning, in the Oval Office, President Bush putting the final touches on his ultimatum to Saddam Hussein.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. Remember the date and the time. Saturday, February the 23rd at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Time, 8 o'clock in the evening in Baghdad. President Bush has given Saddam Hussein until then to begin evacuating Kuwait and he left the or else pretty much up to the imagination. There has been no clear yes or no from the Iraqi leader as of yet, but it is now very evident that if he doesn't begin moving his forces, the Allied coalition is on the verge of invading Kuwait and Iraq by land. It has been a breathtaking 24 hours, during which the Soviet-Iraqi plan for getting out of Kuwait has been completely eclipsed by the president's ultimatum. And here are the president's terms. Iraqi forces must begin a large-scale withdrawal by noon tomorrow. 48 hours later, Iraqi troops would have to be out of Kuwait City, the capital, permitting the legitimate Kuwait government to return. The Iraqis would have to be out of Kuwait entirely within a week, returning to the positions they held on August the 1st, the day before the invasion. They would have to release all prisoners of war within 48 hours and return the remains of any servicemen who were killed. Remove any booby traps they'd set and tell the Allies where all the minefields are. No Iraqi combat planes would be permitted to take off, no anti-aircraft fire. Only transport planes carrying troops out of Kuwait would be permitted in the air. And last, the Iraqis would have to pledge not to do any further damage to Kuwaiti citizens or to Kuwaiti property. Our first report is from the White House. Here's ABC's Britt Hume.
In the Oval Office today, a long morning that followed a late night of intense consultation as the president met with his most senior advisors, spoke by telephone with coalition leaders, and went over the statement he was about to read outside. When he began that statement, he had thanks to the Soviets for their negotiating effort. But it quickly became clear that Mr. Bush was not making a diplomatic counteroffer.
Most important,
it would be an ultimatum.
The coalition will give Saddam Hussein until noon Saturday to do what he must do. Begin his immediate and unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait. We must hear publicly and authoritatively his acceptance of these terms. To say about
After
it right
the
now.
president went back to his office, he later took a phone call from Soviet leader Gorbachev, who outlined the revised Soviet plan. While the hour and 15-minute conversation kept reporters waiting for spokesman Marlon Fitzwater's announcement of the coalition's tough withdrawal terms, it didn't change them. And there were questions about whether the U.S. was now going beyond the UN resolutions and imposing new conditions of its own on Saddam.
These are the minimum kinds of actions that he needs to take to comply with those resolutions, to indeed get out of Kuwait unconditionally.
What is in this, if anything, for Saddam Hussein?
A chance to save his country and to do the thing he should have done the day after he went in on August 2nd.
Few people here tonight think Saddam will suddenly accept the Bush ultimatum and get out. But nobody is really sure. Indeed, Soviet President Gorbachev told the president today he doesn't know what Saddam will do or even if he'll accept the latest Soviet offer. Peter?
Fred, it's been 37 days since the war began, but in the last 36 hours, the pace has seemed to pick up tremendously. What accounts for that at the White House?
Well, a couple of things, Peter. First, I think that the ground war was about ready to go, and so that was a matter of time. And the second thing is I think the administration, indeed it has indicated, it has long been afraid of being drawn into some negotiating process in which it would never be able to get the outright victory and triumph in all of this for the coalition that it believes is necessary and available.
Okay, Britt Hume of the White House, thanks very much. In Baghdad, where the Allied bombing has cut off most water and electricity, a statement was read on behalf of the ruling Revolutionary Command Council. You can see the light he uses. It calls Mr. Bush's ultimatum shameful, but it does not reject it outright. Instead, the Council says it supports the Soviet initiative, which, as we said, seems to have been overtaken by events. In Moscow tonight, ABC's Jim Laurie.
At a hastily called news conference, the Soviets revealed what appeared to be an attempt to narrow differences between U.S. demands and what the Soviets believe the Iraqis will accept. The Soviet plan calls for a ceasefire, then an Iraqi pullout within 3 weeks, not 1 week as the U.S. demands. The withdrawal from Kuwait City would take 4 days instead of 2 days. All UN resolutions against Iraq would be rescinded after the withdrawal is complete.
This is the maximum we could achieve with Iraq in the current situation.
These latest efforts to head off a ground war came after day-long meetings between the Soviet and Iraqi foreign ministers. The Soviets realize they are now in a race against time, but they believe Saddam Hussein is ready to withdraw, if only he's allowed to save some face, which they say the American demands do not permit.
This looks a bit like an ultimatum, and whenever the ultimatum is being put in front of somebody, it puts this somebody into a bit of a humiliated position.
As the Soviets pursue their diplomatic initiatives, they say they are in close contact with the U.S., but that their efforts are and should be independent.
We regard it as an effort which we have to undertake since it is our responsibility as a superpower, if you will.
Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz remains in Moscow tonight, but the Soviets appear now to realize that unless there is some give in Washington or more in Baghdad, their efforts will come to nothing. Jim Laurie, ABC News, Moscow.
As if now it does appear that their efforts have come to nothing. Joining us in Washington this evening is our national security correspondent, John McWethy. John, why the determination by the Bush administration to rush right on past the Soviet-Iraqi negotiations?
I think there was some concern early on, Peter, that the initiative which the Soviets had taken might capture the imagination of much of the world, and it would fall so far short of what the Bush administration wanted that the president felt it was time to move and move quickly to let everyone know that it did fall short and that the U.S. had to establish a new set of lines.
So pulling all together that which you know now, how strong does the administration think its hand is?
At this point, Peter, it is difficult to judge that. I believe that the administration looks at Saddam Hussein's position at this point and believes that he is in a very desperate situation. He has failed in many of the goals that he set out initially to achieve. Certainly, he has not aroused the masses throughout the Arab world and the moderate Arab countries to overthrow their governments. He has not managed to draw Israel into this war. He has not managed to achieve large numbers of casualties against the U.S., and his own country at this point is in a disastrous shape.
And in a word, John, confirm for me, the Soviet plan is now deemed irrelevant.
It is irrelevant, except I have to tell you, Peter, late tonight there are just the little hints that the Soviets are still working with the Iraqis, trying to narrow the differences still further.
Okay, John McWethy at the State Department, thanks very much. We'll have more news in just a moment.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by Jeep and Eagle.
Ask me what counts most after 40 years in the car business, and I don't have to think twice. 1, the minivans. We invented them. 2, driver's airbags in every car we build in this country. What do we do for an encore? Put them together. Minivans with a driver's side airbag. Nobody else is doing it. You still have to use your seatbelt with a minivan airbag, but it will save lives. A lot of lives.
Before I even consider taking a medicine, I have to feel good about it. So before I switched from Tylenol to Advil, I did my homework. I found that doctors have recommended Advil over 50 million times, and that over 100 million people have tried it. That includes me. And you know, 2 Advil work better on my really tough headaches than 2 extra-strength Tylenol. Hey, I don't take just any medicine, but I do take Advil. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
Picking up on where John McWethy left off, that the Soviets are still working on the Iraqis, let's work for a few minutes on a presumption that Saddam Hussein may decide to leave unconditionally. Joining us from Washington is our military analyst, Tony Cordesman. Tony, if he does decide to leave, and I grant you it's presumption, how difficult is it for him to get out in 4 days?
Peter, it may be easier than it seems, and he really has up to 7 days. If we look at the map, he has only one division in Kuwait City. He can easily get that out in 48 hours, and in fact, he can get it out in 8 to 6. That's where the white circle is. In the red area, he has some 24 to 20 divisions. Many are armored. He'd have to abandon a lot of his equipment and stocks, but to actually move the 80-odd miles, which is the farthest line they'd have to move, there's only land, they don't have to cross any bridges, nothing has really been destroyed. The forces here along the border, another 17 divisions, they have lost a lot of their armor equipment, but logistically to move the rest of that manpower out and to start on the routes north is not really that difficult. Now, completing the entire move might be difficult, but there is an escape clause in the terms that if the units continue to retreat, they will not be fired upon.
Thank you for catching me. 4 days was the old plan, 7 days is the current plan. They want him out of Kuwait City in 48 hours because they anticipated the Iraqis might make a stand in a crowded city?
That is, aside from burning the oil fields and using chemical weapons, about the only card they have left. Using urban warfare, the barriers there where we have to fight street by street, and using the Kuwaiti people as human shields.
Tony, just one more question. If he decides not to go, there is surely no element of surprise left for the Allied coalition in terms of a ground attack.
Well, the odd thing, Peter, is we can achieve both strategic and tactical surprise. If we look at that map, and it is a complex one, we can go far to the west, beyond his units, and we can sweep around toward Basra where his units are not located. He can never predict the positions we'll attack. There are gaps and weak points in these defenses. He'll never know where our corps are coming, and along his entire coast, our amphibious and air assault forces can move, and again, no way to predict the patterns of our attack. We have still a tremendous potential for surprise.
Okay, Tony Cordesman, thank you very much. Very interesting. One thing is for certain, after the president's ultimatum, there is no doubt there will be a land attack if Saddam Hussein doesn't begin to move. We'll have more news in just a moment.
In the midday sun, a gentle breeze, the embrace of white eyes, remember these, the touch, the feel, the fabric of our lives, the touch, the feel of cotton, the fabric of our lives.
Farragran wants to know. Changed my life. Not much. With Farragran M, multivitamins with minerals, fine-tuned for the way you live.
This is Jupiter. Not exactly what you imagined, huh? Same atmosphere, same language, same hairdo. But believe me, Jupiter's an advanced civilization. Just look at the menu. There's beef tenderloin at just 179 calories. That's hardly astronomical. Well, one small steak for me, one giant barbecue for mankind. Beef, real food, Jupiter, Florida.
President Bush accused the Iraqis today of launching what he called a scorched earth policy aimed at destroying the entire oil production system of Kuwait. The military says that 140 Kuwaiti oil wells have now been set on fire, 100 of them just in the last 24 hours. 25% of Kuwait is now covered by smoke. ABC's Bill Rediker reports, however, those wells are not the only source of smoke in the Kuwaiti skies.
Pilots stepped up their missions today and had their busiest day over Kuwait since the war began. The weather was clear, but smoke from the oil well fires obscured the skies over some of the target areas.
It's real nice up there today. The worst part is the oil smoke here, you see from all the fires.
Marines revealed today that they have been dropping these napalm bombs on Iraqi defensive positions for the past couple of days. They deny the fiery gel has been used against Iraqi troops, and say the napalm is being dropped into ditches the Iraqis had filled with oil and planned to ignite as a barrier against advancing ground forces. As these satellite pictures taken shortly after the Iraqis moved in show, the ditches stretch across southern Kuwait and into Iraq. The Allies are trying to burn off the oil before a possible move forward. Artillery duels were again fought along the border today. The Marines exchanged fire at 3 separate locations. They said they destroyed 18 Iraqi tanks and took more than 100 prisoners of war. 1 American was killed and 5 others were wounded by return fire. The U.S. denied Iraq's claim that the land war had begun today, but the Saudis say their army pushed 6 miles into Kuwait, clearing a path through a minefield. Central Command says there will be no pause in the military campaign and no let-up in preparations for a ground war. Frontline troops are being warned that 1 of every 4 Iraqi artillery shells contains poisonous gas, and they have been ordered to wear full protective gear if the U.S. begins an attack. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Saudi Arabia.
This morning, Mr. Bush called the burning of the Iraqi oil fields a wanton act of destruction. But Saddam Hussein may have something other in mind than just wanton destruction. Here's ABC's Bob Zelnick.
These are some of the fires burning in southern Kuwait, seen from a distance of 50 miles. The Pentagon says that smoke from oil wells the Iraqis have deliberately set afire will not interfere with a ground invasion.
We will, if we're directed, be able to conduct military operations, and if we got to go through the smoke, we know how to do that.
Former combat pilots and other analysts think that the fires could pose problems for pilots flying reconnaissance or trying to guide bombs to their targets.
It'd be very difficult to fly underneath it. Even if you could, you're simply going to be flying into his small arms fire.
But Pentagon sources noted that the main thrust of the Allied attack is likely to come well west of the smoky area. Military sources here say they are convinced that recent bombing has raised the number of Iraqi tanks destroyed to nearly 2,000, including about 700 deployed with the Republican Guard, many top-of-the-line T-72s. Some in the Pentagon are predicting mass defections and an Allied victory in less than 2 weeks. Iraq's ability to use chemical weapons does remain a concern because the U.S. has had little success in taking out chemical storage facilities. Sources here say that once the ground war begins, Allied aircraft will try to take out artillery and rocket launches along the route of attack that they hope will destroy most of Iraq's ability to deliver chemical weapons. Bob Zelnick, ABC News at the Pentagon.
Oil prices surged very briefly today on news of the damage to the Kuwaiti oil fields, but then they fell back. West Texas crude closed below $18 a barrel for the first time since mid-July. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrials lost 2.5 points to close at 28.89. For the week, stocks closed more than 45 points down. That's the first weekly loss since the war began. We'll have more news in just a moment.
Hot one.
Yeah, this is the one we got to run.
Heat is not the worst punishment here.
Transmission abuse test. Great.
This test is.
Down.
Rock and roll, cows.
From drive to reverse, full throttle, over and over. This severe transmission testing improves Oldsmobile's quality. In fact, GM automatic transmissions are rated better built than most imports and all domestic manufacturers. With 84 models redesigned and engineered, GM is putting quality on the road.
Stouffer's invites you to eat like you really like to eat. Introducing 8 of your all-time home-style favorites, like tender Salisbury steak with our original macaroni and cheese, sliced turkey breast in gravy with homemade stuffing. And to tempt you even more, they're all under 370 calories. So dig in. They're new from Stouffer's.
One company knows the global market so well that it brings you investment opportunities from America and around the world. With a family of mutual funds that give you an intelligent, professional approach to investing, combined with the benefits of diversification. The company that has done all this should come as no surprise. Because at Merrill Lynch, we're bullish on your future.
When I say home by 11, I don't mean an hour later.
But, Daddy...
Another Maalox moment. It's a medical fact. There's no faster therapy known for your stomach acid than Maalox. It's so strong, if you take it now, it starts working now.
Honey, I just can't help worrying about my little girl.
Daddy, I am 16.
Yeah.
Extra strength Maalox Plus. It's a medical fact. There's no faster therapy known. Look for the coupon in Sunday's paper.
From the Iraqi city of Basra today, reports that disease is spreading because the water supplies have been contaminated. The Allies have been bombing Basra every night. It serves as military headquarters for the Southern Front. Allied warplanes were back over Baghdad again today. ABC's Bill Blakemore is there.
Sounds of war began the day in the Athamia district of Baghdad. Anti-aircraft guns reacting to Allied reconnaissance flights in a cloudless sky. And then the men of the district filed into the mosque for regular Friday prayers. The preacher told them that force and faith can go together, that the Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait are heroes. He talked to them of civilian casualties in this war, and he told them the Allied forces are aiming not only to destroy Iraq, but even more, he said, to destroy the faith of Islam itself. When they came out into the sunlight, it seemed for a short time as if peace had come, the streets filling briefly with the quiet bustle of a neighborhood following weekly worship. They all seemed aware that there was a Soviet ceasefire plan under discussion, but they did not seem to know much about the details, only that their president had complained in a speech yesterday that the Allies kept adding conditions which proved the Allies did not want peace. As the day passed, Baghdad radio kept reporting that the stepped-up scale of Allied ground actions on the front today had led the Iraqi military to conclude that the ground war had already begun. By nightfall, as people found their way back into their houses or made their way to shelters, there was reason for many in this capital to be pessimistic about the Soviet peace efforts. If by the time they light their lamps tomorrow night, they find their country is engaged in a full-scale land war with the Allied forces, these people will be disappointed peace did not come, but they will not be surprised. Bill Blakemore, ABC News in Baghdad.
We have one other note from the Gulf. We were sent a photograph today which speaks so much louder than words about the possibilities of a ground war. From next week's edition of Life magazine in time of war, some of the estimated 50,000 grave sites which Saudi Arabia is digging near the Kuwaiti border. Different sections for Kuwaitis, Egyptians, and Saudis who may die in a ground war, all of them dug facing the holy city of Mecca. According to Life, as many as 50,000 graves. We'll have our final report in a moment.
Good morning, America!
Good morning!
Good morning! Wake up, you sleepyhead!
Good morning to you and you and you!
Get up, get out of bed!
Every morning all across America, over 50 million people come to life with Delta faucets.
Live, love, laugh, and be happy!
Good morning, good morning,
Delta,
good
the way water is brought to life.
Do you have a cold?
Yeah.
Here are 2 cold medicines. One relieves these 3 symptoms, this 9. Choose one.
9.
Why?
That's me, all the way down the list. Muscle ache, congestion, general body ache, headache.
You chose Dristan over Sudafed.
I am shocked.
Would you try Dristan?
Yes, I would.
How do you feel now?
Night and day difference, 100% better.
Dristan relieves 9 tough cold symptoms.
I love Dristan, yeah. It's great.
Introducing a new idea in air freshening, Glade Country Pottery.
Put out the pottery, put it here, put it there.
Simple, handmade pieces of glazed pottery.
Put it everywhere, put out the pottery, put the fresh country air anywhere.
The porous clay releases the light, fresh scent for 30 days.
Just put out the pottery, put the fresh country air everywhere.
Put out the pottery, new Glade Country Pottery.
Tonight, international war crimes. Could Saddam Hussein be the first person tried in 40 years? Plus, all she wanted was to look good. She ended up looking like this. She blames collagen. Watch 2020 tonight.
for much of this very dramatic day, first with the Soviet-Iraqi plan and then with the president's ultimatum making so much news, we've tried to get a sense of how it is being regarded on Capitol Hill. It has been more difficult than usual to find any politician who is openly nervous about the possibility of an impending ground war. Joining us from the Hill tonight, ABC's Cokie Roberts. So what's the message up there today, Cokie?
The message is that the American people support this war, and no one in Congress is going to even raise any questions whatsoever about it. One Democratic strategist said, you know, everybody said when we voted against the war here that we were shooting ourselves in the foot. Now you all want us to come out and question the president's hesitancy to take the Soviet plan. What do you want us to do? Shoot ourselves in 2 feet. Only 7% of American men, according to one poll, said this Democrat are against this war. We're not crazy enough to speak against it. They've been so frightened about seeming to be unpatriotic that even a hearing this week that was about the Pentagon restrictions on press coverage of the war was in danger of being canceled because some of the people were afraid that maybe it would look a little bit like they were being critical.
Cokie Roberts, observations from the Hill tonight. Thank you, Cokie. Having heard about the politicians, let's go out once again to Route 83. As we've said before, that's the highway which almost bisects the country from Canada all the way to Mexico. So far in his travels down Route 83, ABC's Tom Foreman has found that people are mostly committed to seeing the war through. Tonight's report is a little different from a place where they've always been proud to be a little different.
Every morning, McCook, Nebraska lines its main street with flags, symbols of the town's belief in America in a time of war.
I'd hope that people aren't just, part of a big pep rally.
In a house on the edge of town, Pam Swoboda also believes in America, enough to say she does not believe this war is right.
Truthfully, I wanted to support it. I wanted to be, join in on all the, everything that's going on. But I just couldn't.
The private battle of conscience over war has an historical place here. In World War I, Nebraska Senator George Norris, McCook's favorite son, stood against popular public sentiment to argue America should not get involved.
Do you know what they're calling me in Nebraska? Just talk. A traitor.
Today, his home stands as a landmark and a reminder of how he triumphed in convincing the public, not to support his position, but at least to respect his views. Voters kept him in office for another 25 years.
How you doing today?
There are other voices.
From day one, I thought we should be there.
Ralph Sprinkle respects people who oppose the war with Iraq, even though he has a son fighting on the front lines.
You got something that you think is wrong and you don't try to correct it, it's not going to be improved. To make a stronger United States, I think everybody's got to say their opinion.
It is not easy to be in a small town's minority.
I'm so worried about offending people, and when you're in a small town, if you're going to speak out, you're going to speak out against your next door neighbor.
But for these two people, each on a different side of the war, one who stands to lose his son, the other her town's respect, the simple freedom to differ is what America is all about. Senator Norris said 82 years ago, "I would rather lie in the silent grave with a clear conscience than ride in the chariot of victory." Beneath the vast silence of the Great Plains, such sentiments are still heard and understood. Tom Foreman, ABC News, McCook, Nebraska.
And that is our report on World News Tonight. We'll have updates on the war every hour on the hour, later on 2020, and also a Nightline with Ted Koppel. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
The president gives Iraq one final chance.
The coalition will give Saddam Hussein until noon Saturday to do what he must do. Begin his immediate and unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait.
After a day of furious diplomatic activity in Moscow, Washington, and Baghdad, the question remains, will Saddam comply or will the ground war begin?
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington with the latest on the Gulf War, Ted Koppel.
At this critical stage, it has boiled down to a war of nerves, a struggle between the proponents of deliberate ambiguity and those pushing for the crystal clarity of an unambiguous defeat. Buried in all the belligerent rhetoric of Saddam Hussein's spokesman is the language of a qualified surrender. Saddam is ready to withdraw his forces from Kuwait, if only. But President Bush seems disinclined to accept any conditions, directly from Saddam Hussein or indirectly through Mikhail Gorbachev. The Soviets plead in Iraq's behalf for a fig leaf, a spoonful of face-saving sugar to help Saddam Hussein swallow the bitter medicine of defeat. There is not the slightest public indication from the White House that any compromise will be forthcoming. Indeed, as Nightline correspondent Jackie Judd reports, the president has set a deadline which is now just a little more than 12 hours off.
After nearly 7 months of crisis in the Gulf, it came to this, an ultimatum from President Bush.
The coalition will give Saddam Hussein until noon Saturday to do what he must do. Begin his immediate and unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait.
And that, the president went on, is the only way that Saddam can avoid a ground war. The same line was being put out in Riyadh at Central Command.
General Schwarzkopf wanted me to pass on to you that U.S. forces are fully prepared for execution of any action or any order given by the President of the United States.
Allied leaders who had been consulted by Washington through the night put Saddam on notice as well.
I hope they recognize that we are not prepared to bargain with them, and we are certainly not prepared to be strung along by them.
The White House laid out the terms for what an unconditional withdrawal would require, and these are the main points. Large-scale withdrawal from Kuwait must begin by noon Eastern Time tomorrow. Kuwait City, the capital, must be cleared out by Monday, and the legitimate government restored to power. All troops must be gone from Kuwait within 7 days, with a retreat to positions held last August 1st before the invasion. And all prisoners of war and remains of Allied servicemen killed must be handed over by Monday noon. The tone of the administration was uncompromising, leaving Saddam with an either-or option.
Ron, what is in this, if anything, for Saddam Hussein?
Excuse me, a chance to save his country and to do the thing he should have done the day after he went in on August 2nd.
Is the hard line to be believed? At the White House, Britt Hume says based on the past few months, the answer is yes.
We in the media have been a little slow to catch on to it, but on this issue, this president seems to mean what he says and to do what he says he's going to do. So when he said no conditions, he meant no conditions. No concessions meant no concessions. And satisfying all UN resolutions appears to have meant just that as well.
In Moscow, the Soviet leadership met again with Iraq's foreign minister, and a Kremlin spokesman announced that a revised peace proposal had been tentatively agreed to.
It has been seriously adjusted to strengthen the responsibilities of Iraq.
The Soviets, say correspondent Jim Laurie, now feel they have pushed the Iraqis as far as they can.
As Vitaly Ignatyenko, Gorbachev's spokesman, put it, we've got the maximum we can achieve. On the question of a timetable for withdrawal from Kuwait, the Soviets believe the Iraqis will accept a 3-week pullout, but not 1 week, and 4 days out of Kuwait City, not 2. And the Iraqis don't trust the Americans to hold their fire as they withdraw, so they insist on a full ceasefire.
But the latest Soviet bid, like an earlier one, was rejected by the Bush administration. Spokesman Marlon Fitzwater emphasized the Soviet effort was appreciated. Nevertheless, he was all but dismissive of it. Fitzwater said because the Soviet president has no troops in the Gulf, Gorbachev is a side player trying to cut a side deal. He said it doesn't matter what Gorbachev does. What Saddam did today was to send out a spokesman who called the president God's enemy and the ultimatum shameful. But there was not a flat-out rejection of it. Earlier in the day, in the Rose Garden, as if to remind people why he was taking such a tough stand, The president described what he called a scorched earth policy undertaken by Saddam.
He is wantonly setting fires to and destroying the oil wells, the oil tanks, the export terminals, and other installations of that small country. Indeed, they are destroying the entire oil production system of Kuwait.
This is looking into Kuwait from northern Saudi Arabia. The result, military officials say, of the torching of at least 100 oil wells within the past day. Photographer Chip Hires traveled north and couldn't take a single picture because of the thick smoke. He was there at noon with the sun out.
The only way I knew it was day, it was far on the horizon there was a small band of lights, and therefore I knew it was day. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. High noon was pitch black.
What does that mean if there should be a ground war and soon? Analyst Tony Cortesman says much depends on the winds, but that Iraq could be the loser in this gambit.
And what it may well do is encourage the United States to drive further around Kuwait to the west and put more forces into an enveloping movement that will go through Iraq. So ironically, it could almost backfire in terms of its impact on the land battle.
For the American soldiers who would take part in the land battle, some were grateful today that one way or another, a resolution seems near.
Now, we don't have to wonder and wait so much. We have more of a feeling about what's going to happen and when it's going to happen.
It's time to rock and roll. Peace sells, but Saddam isn't buying.
There was a chilling reminder of that late tonight. Some civilians still in Kuwait City reportedly have been rounded up by the occupying force.
Since Friday praying finished, we discovered that there are buses which has been loaded by innocent civilian Kuwaitis aged from 15 to 50, blindfolded and taken outside Kuwait.
Also tonight, Iraq fired another Scud missile toward eastern Saudi Arabia. It apparently exploded in midair. So with only hours left before the president's final deadline expires, Saddam Hussein shows no outward sign of giving up. This is Jackie Judd for Nightline in Washington.
To bring us up to date now on the diplomatic front, we go live to the United Nations, where ABC's David Ensor is standing by. It seems, David, that the corridors of the United Nations may be the last place in this country where there is still a glimmer of hope that this thing can be resolved diplomatically.
Well, that's right, Ted, and maybe diplomats have a professional belief in their own work, but I've talked to a couple of ambassadors here who are members of the UN Security Council. They say they're still hearing from the Soviet delegation that those talks continue and that the Iraqis seem to want to make a deal, that they seem to want to make enough concessions. They're trying to find a way to avoid a ground war.
Now, maybe they heard something different than I did in listening to the president, but it didn't sound to me as though President Bush was offering a deal. He was offering what was quite clearly described as an ultimatum, and it is that. No deal. Either take the terms or drop them. What is it now that still causes some of these diplomats to feel that some offer less than what the president asked for is going to be acceptable?
Well, I mean, I can only tell you what they've said to me, and I'm not sure I think it's true. But a number of diplomats have said, look, here are the Iraqis saying they'll get out of Kuwait in 21 days. The United States says they want 7. Here are the Iraqis saying they'll get out of Kuwait City in 96 hours. The United States says they want, I think it is 48 hours. It's just a question of numbers at this point, they say, and they can't imagine that the American president is going to want American mothers to give up their sons and daughters for a battle when it's just a question of how long it's going to take them to get out. This is the argument I'm hearing.
But of course it isn't. I mean, there's the little matter of all those UN resolutions which the Iraqis want dropped as soon as they leave Kuwait, and which President Bush insists have to be met.
That's right. And there are a lot of different ways of talking about it, but they sit there and they have to be approved. And as American diplomats here point out, those cannot be lifted without the approval of the UN Security Council, and the U.S. has a veto on that council.
David Ensor, thank you. We'll go live to Baghdad when we come back and talk with ABC's Bill Blakemore for the latest news from Iraq. And we will be joined live by the ambassador to the United States from the country with the second largest contingent of troops in the Allied coalition, Sir Anthony Ackland of Great Britain.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Radisson Hotels.
If all you need is a room for the night, any of these will do. Of course, the accommodations have a sameness to them, and the hospitality, it's pretty much no, you can't. There's a better choice. Radisson, with 250 hotels around the world, as individual as the people who stay in them. And every Radisson has a yes, I can spirit. So why let a big impersonal place treat you like a number?
Why get a room when you can get a Radisson?
Call me irresponsible.
Just because the other guy is on the road doesn't mean his mind is. So the superb traction of the Subaru Legacy with four-wheel drive and anti-lock brakes can be quite a comfort. Since the next guy is capable of almost anything, shouldn't the same be true of your next car?
Hurry in for great savings today during the Subaru Spring Value Days.
I write a lot of checks each month, but since we opened our Super Now account at First National Bank, paying our monthly bills is a lot easier. Because First National pays us 6% interest on our balance. 6%. No other bank comes close to that. And with my Super Now account, I get free checks, a Visa card with no service fee for 1 full year. All that and 6% interest. Sounds super, doesn't it? It's just the best deal in town, and it's only at First National.
From Walt Disney Pictures, a young man taking on the high seas. Now, in the ultimate test of survival, he's finding the power and the courage to meet the challenge. Shipwrecked, rated PG.
Starts Friday, March 1st at a theater near you.
I'm David Brinkley. On our This Week program Sunday, the war is at a turning point. Is it about over, or will it run on? We'll ask our guest, Secretary of State James A. Baker. Sunday.
It is now almost 7:45, Saturday morning in Baghdad, and joining us live from the Al Rashid Hotel is ABC's Bill Blakemore. And here in our Washington Bureau, the British Ambassador to the United States, Sir Anthony Acklin. Bill, if you would give us a little bit of an update, first of all, on what seems to be the mood in Iraq. And let me focus for a moment on that statement that was read yesterday, your time, earlier today, our time, by a spokesman for the ruling council. We have tended to focus on some of the florid Arab rhetoric, but I must say it struck me that sort of lost between the lines of that speech was someone looking for a way out. Did you get the same impression?
I did, Ted. It was certainly a very angry reaction to being given an ultimatum by George Bush. At the same time, he still, presuming it was Saddam Hussein who wrote that, it came in the name of the Revolution Command Council, the statement still spoke of believing in the Soviet peace process and said that Tariq Aziz, who is still in Moscow, has full authority to speak on behalf of Iraq in that process. So it was not a rejection of the ultimatum. It was just saying we're still working with Moscow.
Has there been, as best you can determine, Bill, and I recognize how difficult it is for you to get around in Baghdad and to talk to people who speak with any authority, but have you been able to determine any sense that the Iraqis recognize that 12 hours from now they are either going to start moving out of Kuwait or the ground war is likely to begin very soon?
Well, the statement came last night just before midnight here, so we haven't gotten a reaction to that. And in fact, President Bush's ultimatum was delivered after sundown as well, so people had already gone inside. But they have their battery-powered radios around. They hear various news broadcasts. And I think everybody in this town knows very well that the ground war is probably about to begin, and I say that because Baghdad radio was saying all day yesterday that the ground war, as far as they could figure out, the Iraqi military, already had begun. They were saying the Allied military movements on the front had stepped up so much that they considered it already beginning.
Why do you think they've placed all their faith in the Soviets to help them hammer out an agreement?
The only answer I can think of to that is that the Soviets are the only ones who came in here with what seemed like a cogent and potential plan. They also had 30 years of relationship with the Soviet Union, and I heard from a number of Iraqis that they felt that the Soviet Union would be a natural third party to work something out here.
So, Anthony, let me turn the question around. Why do you think the Soviets have been so eager and so humanitarian in the way that they talk about the need to avoid the loss of life? Why are they playing this role? Because quite clearly the coalition, unless it did so secretly, has made no public request of the Soviets to enter in as mediators here.
No, the coalition hasn't, but of course we'd all like to avoid loss of life, even at this very late hour. And that is still possible if Saddam Hussein decides to get out. I think that the Soviet Union would like to act as a mediator in this so that they can retain their links with Iraq after the conflict is over and to be well positioned to be an influence in the Middle East subsequently.
Given that as a context, then, do you think that their intervention has been helpful or indeed may have pressed President Bush and indeed your own government into presenting this ultimatum at this time?
We've welcomed the efforts of everybody, including the Soviet government, to try to get unconditional withdrawal. And that actually is what is the first point of the Soviet plan. It says that the Iraqi government accept unconditional withdrawal. And then it goes on, of course, to add a whole lot of conditions.
Precisely.
And as you have said, there's a lot of ambiguity, and that's why the British government entirely supports the President, as do the members of the coalition, in stating quite clearly and unambiguously what we think is necessary to achieve unconditional withdrawal and therefore a peaceful settlement to this tragic dispute.
Sir Anthony, you and your government, as does the U.S. government at the moment, is at great pains to make sure that it says nothing publicly, at least, to offend the Soviet government. But the fact of the matter is they have not been pressing for an unconditional withdrawal. They keep presenting these programs, which, as you pointed out just a moment ago, list any number of conditions attached to that first unconditional withdrawal paragraph. So they're really not being all that helpful, are they?
I think they're trying, and if they can get the Iraqi government, if they can get President Saddam Hussein to withdraw all the conditions and to accept that first point, unconditional withdrawal, well, they'll have achieved a great success, and that's what we all want to achieve. And we think it's very important, if possible, to keep, obviously, the Soviet government with us. They have supported the United Nations resolutions throughout, and they do support that cardinal principle that there can only be a peaceful outcome if the Iraqis withdraw from Kuwait. That's what we're all after.
We need to take a short break. We'll be back with our guests in a moment, and I would like to take up the issue of under what circumstances President Hussein could possibly accept the ultimatum. We'll be back in just a moment.
Every business morning, while the rest of the world is getting up, UPS is guaranteeing overnight delivery before 10:30 to the most people, places, and businesses for up to half what other companies charge. And every business morning, more people are waking up to that fact.
Good morning.
Morning.
Of all these cold medicines, only one combines the pain reliever in Advil with the medicine in Sudafed, Co-Advil. Last year, 7 million people discovered it.
It was a sinus as well as a head cold.
Lead weights in my face, all through here. It felt like a clogged drain.
Co-Advil just cleared everything up.
It was like the lead weights had just gone away.
I was not drowsy with Co-Advil at all.
Try Co-Advil, and the next cold won't seem so bad.
Co-Advil, advanced formula for cold and sinus relief.
Because all Americans like a good all-American deal, Charlotte Furniture and Appliance presents the $3 million all-American closeout sale. Shop store-wide and save up to 60% on the best brand names in America. GE, KitchenAid, Zenith, RCA, Sealy, Whirlpool, and Lane. Plus, no payments or interest for 90 days. Save up to 60% now, but hurry. The all-American closeout closes out Monday at Charlotte Furniture and Appliance.
At Cortez Dodge Suzuki, we have every size vehicle to fit any lifestyle, any budget. Small, medium, or large. Take the little Dodge Colt, for example. Economical on the highway and costs just $69.87. We have midsize Shadow Americas with driver's side airbag for just $79.95. Or save over $2,600 on a 7-passenger Caravan, which includes free air. Cortez Dodge Suzuki is one dealer that fits all. Stop in for a fitting and see how we measure up.
Touchstone Pictures presents Bette Midler and Woody Allen.
Well, look at you.
Together at last, proving there's room in a marriage for many wonderful and intimate things.
I love you.
But the truth
I had an affair.
is not one of them.
Wow! You are the most callow, selfish, short-sighted...
You sure?
I hope you fry in hell!
Scenes from a mall.
Did she do tricks in bed, things I don't do?
No. Yes, actually she did.
Rated R.
Now playing at a theater near you. Check newspapers for local listings.
War is on all our minds. Prime time, investigations, asking questions to get the real story from behind the front lines of the Gulf War. 2020, around the world and into your home. Stories from people who care. When news really matters, it matters where you get your news. ABC News.
And we are back once again with the British ambassador to the United States, Sir Anthony Acklin. Sir Anthony, the White House spokesman was asked earlier today, as we heard just a short time ago, what incentive Saddam Hussein could possibly have to accept this ultimatum. And he said, well, to save his country. Implicit in that is the suggestion that if he does not accept the ultimatum or cave into it, that somehow his country will become prey to what? Invasion?
No, I mean, I think what will happen is that if he doesn't accept the terms, and he's a member of the United Nations, and all that we are asking of him is to fulfill the United Nations resolutions, immediate, complete, unconditional withdrawal. That's what was asked for. And he's been asked to give his answer to the United Nations, not to the President of the United States, but to the United Nations. And that's how he can save his forces in Kuwait from a very, very serious attack, which will happen. The course of the war will continue if he doesn't meet the deadline of 12 o'clock New York time tomorrow. Then the decisions will be taken according to the military criteria as to when to start the land battle.
No, I understand that, but Mr. Fitzwater wasn't talking about his forces. He was talking about saving his country. That's another thing altogether. And while you address that question, if you would, consider also what it means when the UN Security Council Resolution 660 demands that the positions to which the Iraqi forces return are those of August 1, which would mean having some 30-some-odd divisions move way back into Iraq. Are Allied forces going to push them back into Iraq?
He went in very quickly, and he can get out very quickly.
Well, he went in with only 3 divisions, and now he's got 40 divisions. So, I mean, obviously there's a difference, but I'm also talking about those divisions that would have to go up to the Iranian border, for example, which is where a great many of them were on August 1st.
Yes, and we are going to insist, the forces are going to insist that the terms are met, and that once he gets out of Kuwait, he's got to move his forces back from the frontier to ensure security. And what he can do even at this late hour is to try to save his people. There have been civilians tragically killed and suffered in Iraq itself, and there have been his forces killed and bombed in Kuwait. He can save them at this late hour from further destruction and further hardship. He's brought terrible hardship on his own people, and think what he's done to Kuwait itself. The destruction of wiping the infrastructure of Kuwait off the map, and now the firing of the oil wells. He can save his people and the wretched Kuwaitis who have suffered under his rule from any further hardship by meeting the deadline which has been set, and rightly set, to avoid all ambiguity.
Sir Anthony, let me try one more time, if I may. It's one thing to talk about the coalition forces driving Iraqi troops out of Kuwait. I get that part. But who is going to determine and how that they move back to the positions at which they were on August 1st of 1990? Does the British government, for example, countenance the notion of British forces going deep into Iraq to drive those forces back to where they were?
I think we'll have to see what the military situation is if he really starts to move out. I mean, if he does start to move out and the forces keep on moving, that will be fine by us. If not, we'll have to judge the circumstances when we see them at the time.
But if events are driven by the Security Council resolution, you agree that that is what is required, don't you?
The Security Council resolutions have got to be fulfilled, yes.
And if that means driving forces into Iraq, if U.S. and British forces have to move in, I mean, you understand more clearly, I'm sure, than I do what the consequences of that would be. I just want to understand, is that a possibility?
I think it's a possibility. The resolution talks about ensuring the stability and security of the area, and to secure that stability and to make sure that Kuwait is safe in the future and in the immediate future, those forces have got to go back. So we will take the necessary action to ensure that that happens.
I want to go one more time quickly to Bill Blakemore in Baghdad. Bill, obviously now just about 12 hours left until the terms expire. What is your sense? And I realize you're going to have to go on gut as much as anything else. You don't have any more access to Saddam Hussein than we do. What does your gut tell you? Is he going to pull out?
It's hard to say, Ted, because of the fact that the language in that very angry response to the ultimatum kept talking about believing in the Soviet peace plan. Let me put it this way. I was wandering through several neighborhoods yesterday. There's nobody in this town, and I guess I'm one of them, who would be surprised in the slightest if we have a ground war by the time the sun sets tonight.
All right, Bill Blakemore, thank you very much. Sir Anthony Ackland, thank you very much. I'll be back in a moment with more.
Oh, no. My hair's not only going gray, now it's getting thinner. I wish they made something for gray, thinning hair.
They have. Grecian Plus. Grecian Plus is a fresh-smelling foam that gradually brings back natural-looking color, the famous Grecian way. But this Grecian has a big plus. It builds body for healthier, fuller-looking hair.
Your hair looks great. Feels thicker, too.
Grecian Plus, the total treatment for gray, thinning hair.
This good boy shares what he has with the rest of his class. This bad boy doesn't. There's only one Jeep Cherokee Sport.
Save $700 on new 1991 Jeep Cherokees.
Grandma cleaned her dentures with toothpaste. Mom used a soak. I use the denture cleanser of the 90s. Fast-acting Denture Foam. Deep cleans like tablets, fast like toothpaste. To loosen food stains so you can quickly brush dentures clean. Get new Denture Foam. It deep cleans fast.
You don't have to get on your knees to keep your toilet clean. Just use my 2000 flushes. It has chlorine. Bleaches away stains automatically for up to 4 months. 2000 flushes cleans your toilet with every flush.
Coming at you, the Washington's Birthday Blowout. Your Chrysler Plymouth dealers are giving incredible deals on everything in stock. Like Plymouth Sundance America, the lowest priced car in the world with an airbag. Plymouth Voyager, the only minivan with an airbag. And Chrysler New Yorker 5th Avenue, with more rear seat legroom than Cadillac Roll. It's to your advantage to hurry in, because the Washington's Birthday Blowout ends soon.
11:30 tomorrow morning Eastern. Peter Jennings will anchor a special report as we approach the noon deadline. That's our report for now. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
America's watching ABC.
I'm TV 30. Meteorologist Bill Peterson. We will see some snow tonight with some accumulation. Tomorrow with a mixture of sunshine and clouds, our high temperature.
So we spend the gold all in one place?
Ho, ho, very funny. Ha, ha, it is to laugh. Yoinks! And away! Yoinks! And away!
This is an ABC News special report on the Gulf War. Reporting from New York, Peter Jennings.
Good morning. 37 days after the war in the Persian Gulf began, the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein has 30 minutes left to show the world that he really intends to leave Kuwait. Otherwise, the world now believes a land war is truly about to begin. In this next hour, we will not count it down minute by minute, for there is already a widespread belief that Saddam Hussein intends to ignore the ultimatum which President Bush laid out yesterday. But with a fairly large number of people here and overseas, we'll try to figure out whether diplomacy is really dead, and if it is, what the land battle might be like, when it might begin. There is, by the way, no reason to believe that the land attack will begin within the hour. Similarly, there is no reason to believe that there's going to be a lengthy delay. Here are the words of Mr. Gorbachev, spokesman in Moscow, just a little while ago. He said, "I believe Iraq still has time to act, but unfortunately it is not days or months, but hours and minutes." In a minute we'll go to Moscow, but let's begin with what the mood and the political temperature is at the White House. Here's our White House correspondent, Britt Hume. Good morning, Britt.
Good morning, Peter. The president, as you know, is up at Camp David. There is a skeleton staff on board here at the White House. There was some indication yesterday that some sort of statement might be issued to note the passing of the deadline. We've just been told here now that apparently there will be no such statement. They'll be here in case there are other developments, but not the mere passing of the deadline.
In the last 24 hours, Britt, was there any belief at the White House that Saddam Hussein was going to meet the deadline?
Some faint hope. Peter, the president was told by Secretary of Defense Cheney and Joint Chiefs Chairman Powell that they believe that he clearly knows what has been happening to him militarily, and that he seems to be aware by virtue of the Aziz moves and so on of what is about to happen. However, they shrugged their shoulders and threw up their hands and said they couldn't be sure what he was going to do. And indeed, Soviet President Gorbachev told President Bush much the same thing.
Okay, we will indeed talk in the next hour about just how extensive the damage is to Saddam Hussein's army and his political standing at the moment. But the war continues to be prosecuted in the fullest way. There is heavy bombing around Baghdad. ABC's Bill Blakemore is in the Al Rashid Hotel. Bill, good evening. It's 7:30 there tonight. What's the mood? It must be rather depressed.
It is very depressed, Peter. Just as your special was going on the air just 2 minutes ago, we heard the first of some very loud bombs out the window. I spent the last hours of this afternoon in a neighborhood here in Baghdad that we wandered into. People were very subdued when they saw us as an American news team. They came up and were very angry with America. They said, "Why are you doing this? Why are you trading greed for oil, for death? Many people are going to get killed." And everybody in this town tonight is trying to figure out what a land war will mean for life in Baghdad. We've just got our first taste of that, perhaps, in the bombing that just started a few minutes ago.
Bill, just let me ask you, can you see out the window the results of this bombing now as you have in the past? Let's just, while you and I are chatting, let's ask somebody if they'll just take a look out the window. But there were some rumors that President Hussein was going to go on the radio and speak to the Iraqi people a couple of hours ago. What's happened to that?
We are hearing the same rumors. It hasn't happened yet. We're standing by at the radio all night to see if anything will come from the Revolution Command Council or from President Saddam Hussein. So far, we've heard nothing at all.
Now, there was some evidence that Saddam Hussein had met in the last 24 hours with the Revolutionary Command Council. Are those Iraqis in Baghdad aware that he, in the person of Tariq Aziz, has accepted the Soviet proposal or the Soviet-Iraqi plan for getting out of Iraq?
I believe that's been reported on the radio a number of times during the day. Wandering around the town, we get the impression that everybody knows there was something in the works and that it hasn't worked out. I don't think everybody in Baghdad knows the details. They're just trying to figure out how they're going to get through the first night of life with a ground war going on.
Now, I know you were just trying to figure out what's going on at the window. Something, yes or no?
We saw flashes out the window.
Okay.
Whether we're going to be able to get pictures of them to you right now, we're not sure.
Okay,
yet,
we won't distract you. Bill, there have been reports coming out of Iraq, quite often in the last little while, from people who've managed to get out of the country, that there is now a burgeoning opposition to President Saddam Hussein, that there are people who are no longer afraid to speak out against him. There are reports of opposition in the army, even in the Revolutionary Command Council. I know you work under very difficult circumstances and that people are listening to what you say. Do you have any sense of this?
I don't have any sense of it. Of course, I always have the option as a journalist not to talk at all if I feel I'm under some kind of pressure. I can honestly tell you that given our limited access and given the fact that we've been wandering around Baghdad only for the last several days, I haven't seen any sign of that. And whenever we go to any neighborhoods, people come up to us freely. The Ministry of Information person we take with us always hangs back so that we get feelings from people. And everybody we've talked to or who has come up to talk to us says that they're very angry with America now. Whatever their feelings were before the war about Saddam Hussein, they feel unified because they feel their country's under attack. and they say that feelings in the future about America will not be what they've been in the past.
Okay, Bill, we're going to go to Moscow for a moment if you want to try to stick one of your cameras out the window, if it's relevant to do so, but we'd like to be able to continue talking to you. So let's go to Moscow now, and ABC's Jim Laurie, who's standing by there. It isn't very long ago that the Iraqi Foreign Minister, Jim, left Moscow to make his way back to Baghdad. So take us through the last several hours.
Yes, Peter, this afternoon, Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz left Moscow first for Tehran after confirming that his government accepted a 6-point Soviet peace plan. That includes a 21-day withdrawal period for the Iraqis to get out of Iraq. And of course, that plan has been considered inadequate by the U.S. President Gorbachev made one final appeal to the Iraqis as Aziz left, asking them, and we quote here, to weigh the consequences of the next and last stage of the war. So one final appeal to Tariq Aziz. Meanwhile, Gorbachev's spokesman, Mr. Ignatenko, said that the president here had been engaged in a long series of telephone calls all day today with each and every member of the anti-Iraq coalition. Presumably, the purpose of this was to, in some way, salvage the Soviet plan, and at the same time urge them to use the UN Security Council to consider ways, and again we quote here, to find an integrated Iraqi withdrawal plan.
Jim, just before we go a little bit deeper into the Soviet plan and the American plan, let's listen for a moment to a little bit of what Tariq Aziz, the Iraqi foreign minister, had to say just before he left Moscow to go to Tehran, and then presumably he'll have to drive on to Baghdad.
Here tell you that the Iraqi government fully endorses this plan and fully supports it. Last night, the Revolution Command Council issued a statement saying that Iraq supports the Soviet initiative and it appreciates the Soviets' efforts to reach a peaceful settlement to the situation. And we particularly appreciate the efforts of His Excellency President Mikhail Gorbachev and his government in this regard.
Now, there are some serious differences between the Soviet plan and the American ultimatum, which President Bush laid out yesterday as he put it on behalf of the whole coalition. But in the Iraqi proposal, or in the Iraqi Soviet plan, there would be 21 days, as you've heard mentioned, for them to get out of Kuwait, as opposed to the 7 days, which is contained in the U.S. Ultimatum. After withdrawal under the Soviet Iraqi plan, all the Security Council resolutions against Iraq would be null and void. And in terms of prisoners of war and exchanging prisoners of war, it all pretty much comes within the same. There's not enormous difference between the two of them. So, Jim Laurie, I want to know if there's any feeling in Moscow whether or not there's any thought on the Soviet part that they can continue to pursue this plan, or are they resigned to the fact that it's been superseded by the American one?
I think at this point here in Moscow, there is a sense of resignation and sadness. There is some talk of continuing trying for initiatives, but the feeling here is once the ground war begins, and the presumption here is that it will very shortly, then there is very little likelihood of reviving this kind of plan. But as I did mention, the Soviets do seek to take what they have to the UN Security Council, at least for the individual consideration of the UN Security Council members.
Okay, Jim Laurie, if you wouldn't mind standing by. This reminds us so much, of course. This is a live picture from Baghdad at 7:30 in the evening. Precisely what we saw 37 days and 17 hours ago when the war began. It is not, of course, as extensive in terms of defense, as we saw on that first night described by U.S. pilots as like a Christmas tree lighting up. But Bill Blakemore, in Baghdad, we can still see explosions on the ground in the distance. One wonders whether or not they haven't run out of targets. Bill Blakemore, can you hear me? Okay, Bill Blakemore can't hear me for just a second, but that is a live picture of the war continuing to be prosecuted in a very vigorous way. That's the western outskirts of Baghdad.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bill, go ahead.
Blakemore, can you hear me?
Yes, Bill, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. I was going to say, Peter, that this is the sort of thing we've had most nights here during this war. There were a few nights when we didn't have it leading up to that Iraqi proposal of about a week ago. I can just tell you that this bombing somewhere out there on the edges of the city started just about the time your show went on. Some of them have been very loud and have shaken the windows of the hotel a bit.
Bill, can you give us some sense of how far away it is? You're in the western side of the river there, and it's not a very built-up area. But what are the targets far out on the western perimeter there they're trying to attack?
Peter, I can't tell you what direction that's in, and I really don't even know. We just know that it's going on here in the city and out on the edges of the city. And, of course, you'd understand that we're not supposed to talk about any directions anyway.
Okay, well, we can tell you at least fairly safely from here that it is out on the western side of the frontier, and that Bill Blakemore and the Al Rashid Hotel, where they've been hearing the bombing very close in the last several days. And that white picture that you see is the results. We've now become experienced enough to know the results of a very large explosion out on the ground, creating that enormously intense white light from the ground. Bill, have you managed to hear Radio Baghdad tonight and some of the attitude it has taken towards the beginning of a land war?
I haven't heard it myself, but I've heard descriptions of it by people who have been listening, and it sounds like there's been a great deal of description today on Baghdad radio of what they're saying is going to be a major battle, the mother of battles kind of language that we've been hearing for some time here, and saying that the Iraqis would be victorious. We've certainly heard from many of the people in Baghdad we've been talking to this afternoon that they expect it's going to be bloody and that many people, they say, will be killed on both sides.
Okay, Bill Blakemore, thank you very much. We'll be coming back to you a little later in the hour. Radio Baghdad also said today, in terms of the land war actually beginning, if we're attacked, we shall turn the earth into hell. We shall murder you and destroy you with all your sophisticated machinery. Very much the same kind of rhetoric that the Iraqis and other Arabs have heard since the beginning of the campaign. It is difficult to know 37 days into the war, with Iraq having taken such a pounding from the air, whether or not it still invites people to stand up and defy the coalition, which has been so evidently powerful. In terms of the war today, let's go briefly and check into eastern Saudi Arabia, where Sam Donaldson is standing by. Sam, there's been any difference whatsoever today in the way the war has been prosecuted or the way you've been briefed on it? Well, Peter, not only more of the same, but even with greater intensity. First of all, Brigadier General Richard Neal, the briefer in Riyadh about an hour and a half ago, made certain what we've been talking about from the diplomatic standpoint, and that is there is no evidence that they have from intelligence sources that the Iraqis are withdrawing. He says we see nothing on the ground to indicate that there is any Iraqi withdrawal. There have been 1,200 sorties over the Kuwaiti theater of operations in the last 24 hours, Peter, and that is compared with 1,000 the day before, which was a record, so they're setting new records. I'm told their artillery exchanges along the border have been stepped up, as you might suppose. Really, the battlefield preparation is underway. Ground war isn't underway yet, but if the president decides to order one, it could very well come in the next few hours from the standpoint of what we're ready for here. Sam, you're a fair piece from the Kuwaiti border, but I understand that down there you are even there experiencing the effects of the oil fires up in Kuwait. Well, as you can see, it's nighttime here, but during the day, Peter, if you go outside, you can still see the sun, but there is this grayish tinge to the sky. And you're right, we're about 240 kilometers from the border down here in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. And up in Kuwait itself, we're told there are now about 190 oil well installations that are on fire, which is an increase from yesterday's 150. The scorched earth policy clearly is continuing, and that smoke up there is obscuring about 25% of Kuwait, making it more difficult for air to bomb. The president, it was, who called it a scorched earth policy yesterday. Do military people there think it is an effective device by Saddam Hussein to impinge on or impede an attack? Well, it's two things. It's a device to impinge on or impede an attack if that's possible, although our military leaders say they can come right through the smoke. But they also think that he's getting ready for the end. It's the inevitable. In addition to the scorched earth policy of setting the oil wells on fire, we're told today that mass executions are taking place in Kuwait City. This comes from Kuwaiti intelligence as well as our own U.S. intelligence sources. We're told that Iraqi troops are just picking Kuwaitis up off the street, particularly ones that they've interrogated before, and they're killing them. And the view here is they're killing them in order to dispose of the evidence. Okay, Sam Donaldson will be coming back to you on a number of occasions in the next hour. But want to go to Washington now to continue this somewhat difficult to understand process between the United States and the Soviets and the Iraqis. Joining us is our national security correspondent, John McWethy. Have the Soviets and the Americans been speaking this morning, John, and sort of where does that all seem to sit?
It was very late last night that Secretary Baker, who is up at Camp David with President Bush, had a long phone conversation with Foreign Minister Bashmertnik of the Soviet Union. And they apparently went over the details of what the Soviets believe they had accomplished with the Iraqis during the 2 or 3 days of intense negotiations in Moscow. And when it was all over, Baker apparently indicated to Bashmertnik that it still sounded like there were conditions as far as the U.S. was concerned, and it just wasn't going to fly. But there is a very strong impression among some people in the U.S. government that the Soviets are continuing to try to bring the Iraqis along. There is also a feeling that although Tariq Aziz has left Moscow, that the Soviets have a very good communications link to Baghdad, and they are continuing to work this. Now, just speculatively here, Peter, although the United States says that the Iraqis must show by noon that they are beginning a withdrawal and then it must be over completely in 7 days, if the Iraqis were to begin a withdrawal today, even without comment, even without an authoritative announcement that the U.S. wants, some officials are speculating that even if it took them longer than the 7 days the U.S. wants, the U.S. could not go ahead with the ground war. There are still ways the Iraqis can stop this if they want to, but they have to do something other than the kind of scorched earth policy that Sam was describing.
Okay, let me just ask you a couple quick questions, John, before we go on at length about this. Does the Bush administration now think that the Soviets are making a major contribution, they're working on the same side, or that the Soviets are playing for their own goals now?
Oh, I think the feeling at the very highest levels of the U.S. government is that the Soviets are making a good faith effort, and the United States does not regard it as being an impediment. They know that the Soviets do have a slightly different agenda, but there has been no feeling that they are intriguing here for their own benefit.
Okay, let's go away for just a second and then come back and talk about the U.S. plan and the Soviet plan and whether or not perhaps the United States should be waiting a little longer before beginning the land war.
ABC News coverage continues in a moment.
This is the sound of Unisom, the sound of sleep. With Unisom, you hit your pillow and fall asleep fast. Tonight, you can sleep more soundly with Unisom, America's #1 sleep aid.
When sore muscles or minor arthritis pain hold you back, you need strong medicine. Ben Gay with not just one, but 2 pain relievers. Warming power for fast relief helps get you going again. Ben Gay, fast, strong medicine for pain relief.
Why do I enjoy healthier Alpine Lace, low cholesterol and low sodium Swiss low cheese? Because it tastes so good. And now it's even lower in fat.
The healthy and tasty Swiss low cheese tastes so good from Alpine Lace.
That was me, Tommy Lasorda, before I lost 30 pounds in 3 months on the Ultra Slim Fast plan. Now it's even easier to have my shake because Ultra Slim Fast comes ready to drink in new cans. Losing weight has never been so convenient. Wherever I am, I can have my shake. Ah, icy cold and delicious. Who says you can't take it with you?
Ultra Slim Fast. Give us a week. We'll take off the weight.
We know there are lots of things you do to improve your pet's quality of life. We do them too. The Heart's 2-in-1 flea and tick collar kills fleas. It also kills ticks that carry Lyme disease, and even the ones that don't. The Heart's 2-in-1 flea and tick collar is good for up to 5 months, rain or shine. Helping to improve your pet's quality of life is your responsibility. Helping you do that is Heart's.
10 minutes before President Bush's ultimatum to Saddam Hussein to get out of Kuwait, no indication whatsoever on the ground that he's doing so. Go back to our national security correspondent, John McWethy, briefly for a moment. John, on the Soviet plan now. As far as the Bush administration is concerned, the Soviet plan is now a dead issue?
It is a dead issue unless there is some amazing surprise by which a number of the conditions in that proposal drop off.
Okay, let us talk now briefly to two political guests in Washington. We're joined this morning by Senator Orrin Hatch, the Republican senator from Utah, and by Senator Christopher Dodd, who was the Democratic senator from Connecticut. Gentlemen, do you think that the president should have jumped over the Soviet plan? Let me start with you, Senator Dodd. The president should have jumped right over the Soviet plan like this while the Soviets were still working on Tariq Aziz?
Well, I think he was right to try and make sure he preempted the possibility of all of a sudden ending with a lot of conditionality that wouldn't have worked. So I don't fault the president for laying out a plan that really was far more in compliance with the UN resolutions, as adopted, all 12 resolutions taken in their entirety. So I don't fault him for that at all.
Do you get any sense that the president seems to be in a hurry?
No, not at all, and quite the contrary. I think we've had a good week here since the diplomatic efforts of the Soviets began. I think the president, frankly, showed a lot of patience.
Senator Hatch, same question to you. Do you think the Soviets should still pursue their own plan, and should we stand back at all if they seem to be making progress?
Well, we have no problem with them pursuing their own plan, and they have been helpful, and it has shown some degree of cracking on the part of Saddam Hussein, but there are really 4 reasons why the president had to reject their plan. One was the time frame, to give them 15 to 21 days to get out. The president's given them a reasonable 7 days. It took them 5 hours to get in. Maybe it's not too much to expect them to get out. Secondly, we don't want them to have take out all of their equipment as well so they can use it again. Secondly, the UN resolutions. It's very clear that Saddam Hussein does not want to, number one, recognize the legitimate government of Kuwait, and number two, make reparations for the damage and havoc that he's causing. Number three, with regard to the ceasefire, if we give up ceasefire, that means the only way we can enforce any agreement is by a resumption of hostilities, and that would be very difficult to do once that's agreed to. And fourthly, the sanctions. In all honesty, we have to keep the sanctions alive because it's the only way of guaranteeing that this never happens again, that literally we do something about his nuclear, chemical, and biological capabilities, and that we're not suckers in the end, and that we actually put the crimps in this man so that this will never, never happen again.
Senator Dodd, do you believe that the ultimate goal has got to be to get rid of Saddam Hussein, not just to get him out of Kuwait?
No, it's not. I don't think there's any effort to remove him personally here. It's a question of whether or not you can remove him politically, in a sense. What we're really talking about now is the political goals. I don't think anyone questions what the outcome will be militarily. We don't know the cost, but I think the military contest is almost over with. The question is now whether or not Saddam Hussein will survive politically and what that means. I don't think there's any effort, although I'm sure no one would complain tremendously if he were to all of a sudden be removed, but I don't think anyone personally trying to get rid of him.
You raised the cost of land war. Of course, by putting down an ultimatum, the president has not automatically said that the air war can't continue, but pretty much left us all with the presumption that the land war is about to begin. Do you approve of that?
Well, I think you finally got to reach a point here. I leave it up to the military people about when it should begin, but certainly I don't fault the president for finally coming to the point where the air war may have done everything it can do. I don't know what we're shooting at. The targets over there with literally thousands of sorties must not be many targets left, so the fact that you have to go in with ground forces is something that I accept as inevitable in the absence of Saddam Hussein making the decision to remove his forces from Kuwait.
A brief answer from both of you, if I may. Senator Hatch, you first. Do you think the president has been explicit enough with the country about what his goals really are?
I don't think there's any question about that. On the other hand, we know that with regard to the ground war, that there comes a point where the only way you can really end the war is to bring enough psychological and physical pressure to bear that it actually ends. I think the president, Secretary Cheney and General Powell have been very forthcoming with regard to how the war is going to be conducted, what's going to happen, what are the parameters, what will end the war, and really I think it's been one of the most elucidated matters to the Congress, at least, and I think the general public that has ever occurred.
Senator Dodd, quickly from you on that point.
I think the president's done a pretty good job, quite frankly, through all of this. I think he could have been a bit more clear about goals. There was some confusion at the outset and during the process here about exactly what were our goals, but frankly, over the last several weeks, I think a lot of that has been cleared up, and the president's done a very good job.
Okay, thank you both for joining us now. Please don't go away unless you have any other plans. Here's what the American people think in our latest ABC News poll. When asked whether or not the U.S. should have accepted the Iraqi offer to withdraw, 12% said yes, but 82% said no. As to the deadline, if Iraq does not withdraw by noon, should the U.S. begin a ground war right away to force Iraq out of Kuwait? 61% say yes, and 37% say no. Interestingly enough, to pick up on what Senator Dodd and Senator Hatch were just saying, 71% of the people in our poll say that the final objective of the war should be to force Saddam Hussein out of power, and 66% say the U.S. should stop fighting only if Iraq leaves most of its weaponry and its equipment behind in Kuwait. One of the places where there is the most enormous concern about precisely that point, about containing Saddam Hussein, about eliminating him if possible, is in Israel. And in typical fashion, 37 days since this war began, the sirens have been going off in Tel Aviv again. ABC's Dean Reynolds is there. Dean.
Peter, it was about 5 minutes ago we heard that blood-chilling sound of the air raid sirens going off. The Israeli military is saying that they have detected one missile launch from western Iraq. And again, everyone is going through the procedure with the gas mask and the sealed room. As the ground war nears, or the specter of a ground war nears, the Israelis have repeatedly expressed concern that in desperation, Saddam Hussein might turn to unconventional weaponry. And today the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces said that I can certainly say if and when the ground war stage begins that we think Saddam Hussein will have his back to the wall, and in distress, the chance that he will use chemical missiles is greater.
Okay, Dean Reynolds in Tel Aviv, please keep us honest on what is happening there. I want to go to London now, where our chief foreign correspondent, Pierre Salinger, is standing by. Britain, of course, has been a very devoted, almost unanimous member of the alliance. Pierre, in Europe today, particularly with the British and the French, are they completely on board to the president's ultimatum, or do they waver at all about giving the Iraqis another way out?
No, Peter, there's no wavering at all here in Europe, and particularly among the two powers which are the most strong in the coalition, Great Britain and France. There has been some wavering in countries like Italy and Spain, but not in the important countries like Great Britain and France.
And do you pick up anything there today, listening to the Middle East at all, as to which direction the Iraqis may go in the next several hours?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I've talked to some Iraqi sources. I think one of the things we have to understand is Saddam Hussein's mentality. He's a person who does not accept dates or times to do things. He did not accept January 15th. We know that when Tariq Aziz met with James Baker in Geneva on the 9th of January, that in the first 3 hours, Tariq Aziz talked almost about nothing else but eliminating the January 15th deadline, because he said that was something that Iraq would not accept. So that the George Bush proposal for pulling out before, and we're just about that time, tonight, is a fact that he wouldn't accept either. He also links that to something else in his mentality. He has been talking about withdrawal now for 8 days, but he will not do what he thinks George Bush is telling him to do, which is surrender.
Pierre, you have a large Iraqi exile community in London. There's a very interesting article in today's Washington Post written by Glenn Frankel, referring to a number of those people in the exile community as saying that Saddam Hussein is truly on the ropes internally with his army and with his close circle of political advisors. Do you pick up the same thing?
We are picking up that there is a growing opposition inside Iraq. Actually, it's interesting with the Iraqi opposition because they are very much against Saddam Hussein, but they're also very distressed about what they're seeing in their own country. They really believe that the country has been attacked heavily and more heavily than they think it should have been to liberate Kuwait.
And I noticed a note today from British intelligence saying that there may even have been defections from the Republican Guard itself.
Well, that's been around for about 2 or 3 weeks. We had some information about 3 weeks ago that some Republican guards had defected into Iran. So anything is possible. I think that there is chaos inside Iraq now. And if the land war starts, we're going to see how far that chaos is.
And there are also some reports, although they're unconfirmed reports, that the Saudis have put together a coalition of Iraqi exiles which they would like to impose on Iraq if, in the process of this land war, Saddam Hussein could be overthrown. Anything on that?
Yes, there have been meetings going on in Saudi Arabia where they have brought some Kuwaitis in to try to, some Iraqis in, people who have been in the opposition, to try to create a government. But remember that there's a counter-operation going on, and that's going on in Iran. What Iran would like to see is a Shiite Muslim government run by the Shiite Muslim director Qasim, who's in Iran, and thereby put together two Muslim countries next to next.
Okay, Pierre Salinger, you know, at this particular moment we could go to a clock almost anywhere, but it's just before 8 o'clock in Baghdad, just before noon here in the eastern United States. As we've been talking to Pierre Salinger, why don't we go to Big Ben in London to remind you all that this is the deadline which President Bush imposed 24 hours ago for the Iraqis to begin a large-scale withdrawal from Kuwait. That's what it looks like in Baghdad tonight on the western outskirts of the city. As we look and listen, just recall again the U.S. demands that the large-scale withdrawal from Kuwait had to begin at this moment. A complete military withdrawal had to occur within a week. Within 48 hours, Saddam Hussein had to remove all his Iraqi forces from Kuwait City and allow the prompt return of Kuwait's legitimate government. He had to withdraw from all prepared defenses along the Saudi-Kuwaiti and Saudi-Iraqi borders. Within a week, he had to turn all Iraqi forces to their positions of August the 1st. Within 48 hours, he had to release all prisoners of war and third country civilians being held against their will. All explosives or booby traps had to be removed. He had to provide the location of land and sea mines to the Allied coalition. All combat aircraft overflight of Kuwait was supposed to stop as of now, so that the only aircraft leaving out of Kuwait would be troop transports carrying troops out of the theater of operation back to the positions they'd held on August the 1st, and they were supposed to, at this point, cease all destructive actions against Kuwaitis and against Kuwaiti property. There is no sign whatsoever that he has complied. This morning, there was no real belief that he would comply. We'll be back in just a moment.
Fine lace American slices.
Tastes so good.
Low cholesterol and 50% less sodium. Two-thirds less saturated fat.
Healthy and tasty American. Tastes so good.
Red Devil enamel. You can always count on its durable finish. Harder than ordinary paints, its beauty lasts and lasts. Red Devil enamel for the finish of a lifetime.
Today, there's a diet pill that can help you lose weight without caffeine to make you nervous.
All my life I've been struggling with my weight. With Dexatrim, I finally lost weight and without being hungry.
No matter what else you've tried, Dexatrim can help you lose weight. Just one works all day, morning through bedtime, to control your appetite and help you lose weight.
Dexatrim did it for me. I lost weight and feel great.
Today's caffeine-free Dexatrim. Nothing works harder to help you lose weight. Nothing.
They weren't expecting a 70-year-old coach, that's for sure. But I held my own.
All right, come on.
They never even saw how scared I was. I wouldn't have tried for this job if it hadn't been for AARP. They've got a program that convinces employers that it's smart to hire people like me. I'm not old. People are people. Some of us have just had a little more practice. That's all.
AARP, making a difference.
What would it take to get you to change from Advil or Tylenol? How about something new from Bayer? New Bayer Plus with Stomach Guard. It's got it all. Bayer Plus has Bayer aspirin for powerful pain relief, to bang back headaches, muscle aches, and minor arthritis pain. And New Bayer Plus has more. Stomach Guard to help prevent stomach upset. So bang pain back with New Bayer Plus, the wonder drug worth trying. It's tough on pain, gentle on your stomach.
ABC News coverage of the Gulf War continues. Here again is Peter Jennings.
Historically, it may well be that we have passed a moment of truth, 12 o'clock Eastern Time in the United States, a little after 8 o'clock in the evening in Baghdad, now 37 days after the war began. The deadline that President Bush set down 24 hours ago on behalf of the Allied coalition for the Iraqis to show they were getting out of Kuwait has come and gone. We are now joined in Moscow by one of the men who was instrumental in bringing the Iraqis as far as the Soviets were able to. His name is Evgeny Primakov. He has been Mr. Gorbachev's special envoy to the Middle East. He has a long record in the Middle East, a lot of experience. He's been into the negotiations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union as well. Mr. Primakov, thank you very much for coming to join us. Would you mind telling me at the beginning, where do you think this leaves the world right now?
Peter, I have just seen President Gorbachev, who had a telephone conversation 10 minutes ago with President Bush. President Gorbachev emphasized once again that within the system of priorities, the Soviet-American relationship is at a very high level. President Gorbachev also said that all this time we have been acting together, and only as a result of the fact that the United States of America has undertaken such powerful actions, all kinds of actions, military, etc., and so on and so forth, all this has made it possible to reach the formula that we have been able to achieve. But that formula does exist, and it makes it possible to solve the problem within 1 or 2 days. Unless, of course, the military action is unfolded further.
Can you be more specific, Mr. Primakov? How can this be resolved within 1 or 2 days if President Bush finds the agreement which you and the Iraqis reached unacceptable?
At
this
point in time, there is no question as to who likes what. It is perfectly clear that Saddam Hussein has for the first time confirmed the fact that he, without any conditions, without any reservations, completely and fully will withdraw his troops from Kuwait. What is most important here? The very fact of withdrawal of forces. We can now convene the Security Council, we can integrate our positions, and we can do everything possible in order to carry out such troop withdrawal under supervision. We can argue about datelines and timeframes, but why should we start now this large-scale operation that will take a heavy toll in human lives when everything seems to have been done already?
When Tariq Aziz left Moscow, were you under the impression that he was able to speak for Saddam Hussein, or did he have to go back and tell Saddam Hussein what was on the table before there could be any further answers?
Not only did I have such an impression, but we also have a confirmation of that fact, because at first an envoy had to be sent to see Saddam Hussein, but then we made our communication lines available to him, otherwise we couldn't reach him. Well, the Allies bombed out the communication station in the Iraqi Foreign Ministry, therefore the Iraqi embassy has no communication lines, so we conveyed all that through our own embassy. Last night Saddam Hussein accepted all that. Once again, I repeat, he accepted all those conditions. That is to say, the complete withdrawal of his troops from Kuwait.
Mr. Primakov, if the war begins now, if the land war begins, can this still be resolved politically, diplomatically, or once the land war begins, is it a war to the finish and until Saddam Hussein is totally defeated?
I cannot possibly respond to this question, Peter. We are too friendly with you in order for me to speak falsehoods. I merely wish to say simply it will be far more difficult to do anything after the ground action is undertaken.
And when you and Mr. Gorbachev told President Bush that it would be more difficult after the ground action began, did he give you any indication that he would hold off the ground action?
I cannot go into details of that conversation. That was a restricted conversation. I can only say that we expressed to President Bush a lot of kind words about each other. There were a lot of kind words about the intention to maintain our relationship at a sufficiently high level. But we are experiencing a critical moment at this time when all this must be put into practice. Once again, I wish to emphasize we couldn't have done anything without the United States of America. But if we have achieved something by now, can we not put it into practice?
Just one last question, Mr. Primakov, and perhaps it only requires a one-word answer. Do you think Saddam Hussein can be squeezed any tighter without the land war beginning in order to make further concessions?
If there is a Security Council meeting, then I can say in no ambiguous terms, yes.
And are you going to call for a Security Council meeting?
I think such a call has already been made, and there is a debate going on around this, but it seems to me that the Security Council must be convened before such a decision is made that could still be put off by 1 or 2 days.
Mr. Primakov, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us this morning. Evgeny Primakov, Mr. Gorbachev's Middle East envoy, who has been back and forth to Baghdad a number of times since the war began. Moving on, there has been a Scud attack on Israel. There was an explosion heard in the area of Jerusalem, according to the news reports which have already passed through the censor and have come out of Israel. The Army spokesman, Brigadier General Nachman Shai, said an Iraqi Scud missile had hit Israel. We cannot give you any more details of it than that at the moment. Dean Reynolds in Tel Aviv is off checking as best he can. So there, for the moment, with the deadline now passed, is the political situation pretty much up until now. Let us turn to the war itself. Let's go back to Dhahran, to Sam Donaldson in Saudi Arabia again for a minute. Sam, is there any sense there whatsoever of how quickly this might begin, this land campaign?
Well, Peter, the commanders say they're ready to begin it as soon as President Bush gives the order, and I think that's quite true. The intensification of the bombing, the use of napalm, the intensification of the artillery, all demonstrates that that kind of battle preparation is well underway. But let me show you something which even goes beyond that, and that is that already the engineers have knocked holes in the berms that separate the border between Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Let's take a look at that activity that's happened just within the past 24 hours. First came the engineer plows, vehicles with bulldozer blades that push down the hard-packed sand that make up a double line of berms along the border. The plows opened several gaps in the berm. Behind them came the armor, the M1A1 tanks, the Bradley fighting vehicles, moving fast, getting through in a cloud of dust. Forming up quickly in a fighting stance on the other side. In this particular location, there was no immediate Iraqi resistance, but Captain Robert Varela of Pecos, New Mexico, who led this armor unit, spoke of a real sense of accomplishment.
Feeling of elation, relief, morale is very, very high. We finally did our job, and we breached the berm and went into Iraq. Hopefully this is the start of the end, and we'll get home quickly.
So you see, Peter, even though the ground war hasn't started, our tanks are already over the border in Iraq, and as a matter of fact, according to a pool report, we have already set up a refueling base somewhere in Iraq for our helicopters.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. We'll be coming back to you before the hour is over, but we want to go to the United Nations now, where ABC's David Ensor is standing by. David, because I gather there's been some development.
Well, perhaps, Peter, and that's about the best I can say. There is a formal closed session going on now inside the UN Security Council chamber. It was called by the Soviets, and it started with Ambassador Vorontsov giving a report to the Security Council. Ambassador Pickering of the United States said he will also be describing the Bush position on how the Security Council resolution should be enforced. There's a good deal of discussion going on, a lot of rumors in the hallways, but three diplomats on the record have come outside the chamber, a Soviet, a Canadian, and an Iranian, and have all said that Mr. Vorontsov has told the Security Council that Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz has now responded positively to the Bush statement yesterday. That's all I have. Ambassador Pickering, apparently, according to these diplomats, said he found that very interesting and got right on the telephone with Washington. I don't know what to make of it, but I thought you ought to know about it.
Yeah, you certainly should. Thank you very much, David, for telling us. Let's go to Washington now and talk to our national security correspondent, John McWethy. Mr. Pickering will have phoned Secretary Baker, I assume, John, right? Hang on, John. Hang on, Jack. We'll open your mic again. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, stand by. Start again.
Secretary Baker is up at Camp David, Peter, so he will be sitting there right with the president. It's Bob Kimmett, the number 3 man here at the State Department, who would be taking the phone call in all probability from Ambassador Pickering.
What's that sound like to you?
Well, it sounds very interesting. As we've been indicating, the Soviets have been working all along, very quietly, very persistently, pushing the Iraqis. Now, whether or not, as you just asked Yevgeny Primakov, whether or not the Iraqis can be squeezed enough to slow down what the U.S. says will now be set into motion, I think that's a big question, and it's going to be very difficult for the president to delay this anymore.
There's a confusion here for me. See if you can help me out, because Tariq Aziz apparently left Moscow because he was not able to make any more decisions on his own without consulting directly with Saddam Hussein. He hasn't got back to Baghdad, yet the Soviets say he's responding positively to the Bush proposal of yesterday. The Soviets must surely have known that.
Well, I had heard that it was someone different than Tariq Aziz who was responding, Peter, that it was the Prime Minister of Iraq that was responding in some positive way. Now, we're in the middle of a very dangerous kind of speculation here, because what's happening now in the United Nations, I think we have to look at. But as far as the U.S. is concerned, the deadline is passed, and things are going to move forward.
Okay, so from the fog of diplomacy, let us go back to the fog of war. We're joined this morning by our military analyst, Tony Cordesman, who's been with us for more than a month now. Tony, why would it be in the president's interest now, or in the military's interest, to begin a land campaign in a big hurry?
Peter, by this point in time, we have already breached their forward defenses. We have already moved our troops into attack positions. They are ready to go, and that has a morale and a logistic impact, but the other impact is that if we pause and wait, they will be able to move and deal with the corridors and attack corridors that move through these areas. Now, we have to consider that if we've been using the rapier up to now, let's take a look at the map.
We're using the what up until now, Tony?
The rapier of air power.
Right.
We're now going to start using the sledgehammer. We can flank around Kuwait toward Basra, bypassing most of his divisions, some 24 divisions inside Kuwait. We already have special forces throughout the area. They're targeting, raiding, gathering intelligence, acting already to disrupt Iraqi forces. We are able to penetrate through the forward line, as Sam has shown. We've already burst through some of these forward defense positions. We have amphibious forces ready to attack at any time, and these amphibious forces might be the key to liberating Kuwait City, while the Marine Corps forces penetrate up the coast and join with them. At the same time, we have air assault forces. These air assault forces are shown here going into the area of Kuwait City, but they could go anywhere, and they can move at a speed of well over 100 miles an hour, moving attack helicopters and troops together. At the same time, the key tactic we have is called envelopment. That means we can bypass virtually all of their forces, avoid a tank-to-tank or armor-to-armor combat, avoid dealing with the remaining part of their artillery. They will never know whether we are driving at Basra, driving to cut off their forces here, or moving further north. And they have virtually no way now to take the rest of their forces in this area and move it to counter our thrust. So we are really now capable of bringing all of these tools together, not one by one, but at the same time. We still have our air power, an almost complete monopoly of it, and that's what I mean by the sledgehammer.
Okay, we're also joined this morning by retired Marine General Bernard Traynor, who talks to us from Boston this morning. General Traynor, why, from a military point of view, take into account weather, morale, the moon, morale on both sides at this point, is this an attack which could not wait for, say, another several days?
Well, it could wait, Peter. The whole thing is a technical matter at this point. The military has prepared for the attack, and from what we learn, apparently they're ready to go on a technical basis. So the point is, on a policy basis, should they go? And that's a political decision. But militarily, apparently they're ready to go. They can wait a few more days and continue the preparatory fire, and the effect of that is basically a psychological one on the troops, who are now prepared to launch their attack, and their adrenaline is flowing rather rapidly, I would imagine.
We have been hearing, and I'm sure you have been the same, of numerous reports of bad morale in the Iraqi army after 37 days of bombing. Do you have any sense of how serious that might be at the moment?
Oh, I imagine they're all suffering from Excedrin headaches up there from the pounding that they've been getting. I suspect there are some units that have not really been hit, and these are the units that are not at the points of penetration or flanking attacks. But those troops and units that are in the vicinity of where the sledgehammer, or as Quartersman mentioned, or the spear thrust for the breakthroughs, those units I'm sure have been pounded very, very heavily.
Okay, thank you very much. Want to invite in two of our now regular guests. Oh, I beg your pardon, I want to go first to the Pentagon. Thank you for reminding me. Bob Zelnick's over at the Pentagon. Bob, go ahead.
Peter, first of all, Secretary Cheney is at his desk at the Pentagon today, and he is in touch with the President and the national security apparatus at Camp David and the White House in case there are any orders one way or the other. Secondly, there's no pressure whatsoever from the military chain of command to initiate this ground assault now, or a day from now, or 2 days from now. Everything that Tony Quartersman said about the preparations and the readiness and the tactics of the U.S. military in the field was true a couple of days ago. It will be true 2, 3, 4, 5 days from now. So it's really a political decision at this point whether to wait or whether to initiate the hostilities.
But that's not a totally apolitical building you live in. I assume that you practically live in these days. The military choice, of course, is immensely attractive politically because it really is the closest you get to eliminating Saddam Hussein, right?
Well, the military has been a good deal less hawkish than the political side of this administration all along. In the military view, they've done an enormous amount of damage to the military infrastructure of the Iraqi forces, and that even if there was nothing beyond the Soviet plan in terms of an Iraqi withdrawal, there have been 40% of the Iraqi tanks at least eliminated, a good deal of the artillery, a good deal of the troop carriers, and so forth. In fact, the military view was that the Bush presentation, the Bush plan announced yesterday, was a formula for conditional surrender and disarmament of the Iraqi forces in the Kuwait theater. The military logisticians said that by no stretch of the imagination could Saddam Hussein withdraw more than about 50% of his forces in the next 7 days.
Okay, Bob Zelnick of the Pentagon, thanks very much. We've reestablished contact with Baghdad. ABC's Bill Blakemore is there. Bill, have you heard anything in the last couple of minutes about the Iraqis perhaps accepting or showing some interest in the Bush plan?
No, we haven't, Peter. Usually that news takes a little longer to get to us here in Baghdad than it does to some other places around the world. We have had an all-clear from that air raid that started nearly an hour ago. I don't know if that will be symbolic of what you may be hearing out of the UN. For the moment, we have some fires out on the edge of the city. But again, this is typical of what's been going on most nights here. So as far as we're concerned, we're still going through air raids.
And nothing else on Baghdad radio this evening?
Not yet. We're monitoring it to see what comes up.
Okay. Thanks very much, Bill Blakemore. It's going to be yet another long night for Bill. It's 8:30 in the evening in Baghdad. Not many people in Iraq have had a full night's sleep in the last month and some days. Baghdad radio, by the way, to just reaffirm what Bill Blakemore had to say, hardly ever reports the bad news, so they live in something of a vacuum. Now joining us, two people who talk to us on a regular basis about the impact of all this on the Middle East. Judith Gipper on the right and Bill Quant on the left. Judith, may I start with you? You hear in the last couple of days with the possibility of a land war beginning that this is the U.S. off in a clear attempt to dominate the region. Should that be taken seriously, do you think?
I think it should, and I think what Evgeny Primakov said to you had some real clues in it, the degree to which he defended the U.S.-Soviet relations, that no matter what happens, this shouldn't have an impact on the highest level of those relations between Bush and Gorbachev. I think he also indicated that if this peace process can simply get to the UN Security Council, as it apparently has, that this may be the bridge between the two plans, the U.S. and Soviet plan, which would clearly be face-saving for both sides, and the U.S. preemptive diplomatic strike that the president made in putting forth an American plan, I think then could ease the tension that might arise in U.S.-Soviet relations.
Okay, Judith, thank you. Just before I go to Bill Quant, let me tell you again a little more about what we do know about the UN that David Ensor reported. The Soviet ambassador, Yuri Vorontsov, told a Security Council meeting, according to 3 different diplomats who came out of the meeting, that Iraq had responded favorably to some of President Bush's conditions to end the Gulf War. Vorontsov had apparently read a list of conditions that coincided with those required by the United States. And Thomas Pickering, who was the UN ambassador, or the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, has been off in pursuit, you can well imagine, of clarification. Bill Quant, effect on the region again. If the Arab world as a whole thinks that the Soviet plan looks reasonable to them, or less than the ultimatum looks reasonable to them, and the land war begins, what are the ramifications for the United States?
Well, first, there's not going to be a single Arab reaction.
True. The moment I said that, I realized it was wrong. I apologize.
There'll be very diverse ones. I think one senses a gap between Arab states and between regimes and popular opinion. A lot of the regimes, the Egyptians, the Saudis, Kuwaitis, and Gulf states, really do want Saddam Hussein eliminated. And they will be very pleased to see any movement in that direction. But literally, they would like to see him gone. I think many others in the region do want to see Iraq back inside its borders. They want to see Kuwait restored, but they don't want to see Iraq beaten anymore. They really want to see the war come to an end soon.
Okay, thank you, Bill Quant. Sorry we kept you for so much of the hour there. I want to go back, because we only have a couple of minutes now, to Britt Hume, who knows the mind of President Bush a lot better than the most of us. Britt, this has become such a personal test of wills in the view of many people between President Bush and Saddam Hussein. And there is always the possibility that what we're hearing out of the United Nations now is another Iraqi attempt to buy itself some time. But if it looked positive, do you think the president would hang back, or does he still want to go ahead with the land war and get rid of Saddam Hussein altogether?
Well, Peter, if it looked positive, this is, after all, what he asked for, an authoritative response made to the United Nations. If David's information and his sources are correct about it, this would appear to meet at least the first phase of the test that he set down. And as long as it were accompanied promptly by further responses on the ground in the region, my sense is that the president would feel that the ultimatum had been agreed to and the ground war would be off. That's a very big if, of course.
Is this something that was anticipated at all there, or did the president yesterday, when he laid this down, pretty much resign himself to an inevitable land war?
Well, I think that he was very much prepared to go with a land war, Peter, and felt that it was very likely that Saddam Hussein, who has responded positively to nothing yet, would not respond positively to this. I don't think anybody here ever gave up hope, because so much is at stake. But hope is about all it was.
Okay, thanks very much, Britt Hume. Just want to quickly check in. We've only got about a minute left with Jack McWethy at the State Department to see if you found out anything, Jack, on the telephone.
No response yet, Peter.
Okay, Jack McWethy at the State Department. Thank you very much. And to everybody else, sorry I kept some of you waiting. But just try to review a little bit where we are. The Soviet and the Iraqis have now finished their conversation. The Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz is on his way back to Baghdad. He has not yet arrived there. He has to flow through Tehran. And Evgeny Primakov, I'm told in my ear, has told us from Moscow just a moment ago that Tariq Aziz, the Iraqi Foreign Minister, has accepted some of President Bush's proposals. But 27 minutes ago, almost 30 minutes ago, we passed that deadline, which President Bush set down 24 hours ago, for the Iraqis to begin and to show to the world and declare to the world that they intended to begin a massive withdrawal from Kuwait, which was going to have to be completed in 7 days. In the Soviet proposal, that withdrawal was going to have to be completed in 21 days. So there was some considerable distance there. Whatever the case, we do not know whether the mother of all battles is about to begin, but Saddam Hussein, to quote someone, is still in the mother of all corners. More on World News tonight with Carol Simpson. David Brinkley's guest tomorrow morning will be the Secretary of State, James Baker. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Peter Jennings in New York.